Welcome back. I bet you're exhausted. Come on in, my husband's voice greeted me as we approached our doorstep. But before I could step inside, my mother-in-law intercepted, blocking my path with a rigid stance. Jennifer, could you run a quick errand for us? It's just a small shopping trip. After all, you're the daughter-in-law. With a curt nod, she handed me a list, the door closing firmly behind her. I'm Jennifer, a 25-year-old housewife, married to David for 2 years now. Once upon a time, I had a long-term boyfriend. We met in middle school, and our romance endured through high school and college, a solid 5 years. I thought we were on track to marry once our careers settled. But then, as my sophomore year of college drew to a close, he vanished without a trace, leaving behind a solitary message. I'm sorry, we should break up. And just like that, he vanished from my life. I searched high and low, but his whereabouts remained a mystery, even to my closest friends. It was a crushing blow. If you're ending things, at least have the decency to tell me why. I pleaded silently, but he vanished into thin air after 5 solid years together. Acceptance seemed impossible, and moving on felt like an insurmountable task. I wished he had just ripped the bandage off brutally, rather than leaving me hanging in limbo. Throughout the remainder of my college years, I spiraled into a cycle of self-destruction. Week after week, I drowned my sorrows in parties, earning a reputation for offering indiscriminate hugs to every guy in sight. Yet by some stroke of luck, I never allowed things to escalate further. Perhaps it was his lingering influence that restrained me, preventing me from veering into darker territory. My longtime friends couldn't bear witnessing my downward spiral any longer. With the best intentions, they began to introduce me to eligible suitors, hoping a new romance might anchor me. Each introduction brought forth quiet, steady men, but I recoiled from their advances, paralyzed by the fear of abandonment. Still, I forced myself to honor my commitments to my friends, and then amidst the haze of doubt and fear, I encountered someone who ignited a glimmer of hope within me, David. Older and with a steadfast determination, he possessed a clarity of purpose that resonated deeply with me. I'm focused on building my career, and I seek a partner who will stand by me at home, he declared with unwavering certainty. His words resonated deeply within me, stirring memories of the dreams I once shared with my ex. Yes, marriage had always been a part of our plan. From the outset of our relationship, we both envisioned a future together. After graduating from college, I dedicated a year to gain valuable work experience, a period of growth that I found enriching and fulfilling. Yet, when the time came to fulfill my promise to David, I willingly set aside my career aspirations to embrace the role of homemaker. Our life together has unfolded with a remarkable ease. David has proven to be not only loving but also remarkably considerate. Drawing from the independence I cultivated during my time living alone, I seamlessly transitioned into managing our household, and on those occasions when illness or fatigue set in, David readily assumed responsibility for the chores without hesitation. While David's career may not be glamorous, his unwavering dedication to his work is admirable. Our life together may lack the extravagance of some, but I find profound contentment in the simplicity of our marriage. Approaching our second Christmas together, my mother-in-law's call sent a shiver down my spine. Come home for Christmas this year. We have relatives to visit, she commanded, her tone as stern as ever. Compared to my own laid-back mom, her assertiveness always left me on edge. Of course we'll be there, I replied, attempting to mask my apprehension. Last Christmas, we opted for a trip, bypassing the in-laws since it was our inaugural year of marriage. I recalled how David had briefed his parents on our plans, yet when the call came from his mother, it was left to me to handle. Did he struggle to assert himself with them? The looming invitation filled me with dread for the impending holiday. Despite not being intimately familiar with my husband's family dynamics, I reassured myself that it was only a 2-day affair, a manageable stint. David, your mom called. What's the plan? I asked, a touch of anxiety creeping into my voice. She wants us both to come home for Christmas. There are relatives to visit too, remember? Since we skipped last year, we thought it's only fair to spend this Christmas with them, he replied, a hint of uncertainty in his tone. With gifts in tow, we felt adequately prepared for the occasion. The drive to his parents' house was a relatively short hour and a half, yet the anticipation weighed heavily on me. It had been a while since our last visit, and I couldn't shake off the nerves. Just relax, it's Christmas, David reassured me casually as we stepped out of the car, his easygoing demeanor doing little to ease my apprehension. As we arrived, A familiar voice called out, and David hurried over to greet the source, Emma, his cousin. She wrapped her arm around him in a playful gesture, but David quickly shook her off, a hint of annoyance flickering across his features. Emma, a year older than David, had a tendency to tease him relentlessly, a dynamic that had persisted since childhood. The first time I encountered Emma, her casual familiarity with David caught me off guard. I initially suspected she harbored feelings for him, viewing me as a rival. However, I soon realized the opposite was true. Emma's teasing stemmed from their long-standing sibling-like relationship, a bond that remained unchanged even into adulthood. Despite David's exasperation with her antics, Emma extended warmth and friendliness towards me, dispelling any initial misgivings. "Jennifer, it's been ages. Let's catch up over plenty of drinks this Christmas. See you tomorrow. I've got some errands to run," Emma chirped before darting back into the house. "Great, just what we needed," David muttered, clearly annoyed by the unexpected encounter. As we stood outside, David grumbled about our luck in bumping into Emma so soon. With his parents' house in the opposite direction of where we needed to go for the relatives' gathering, he began to stride towards his family's residence, voicing his frustration. Despite the disruption, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. Perhaps Emma's brief appearance was a blessing in disguise, a timely distraction that helped alleviate my nerves. With renewed determination, I followed David towards his parents' house, ready to embrace the festivities ahead. "We're back," my husband announced as he swung open the front door, only to be greeted by the hurried approach of my mother-in-law. "Welcome home. You both must be exhausted. Come on in," she ushered us inside. "Hello, mother-in-law," I greeted politely, attempting to follow my husband into the house, only to be halted in my tracks as she intercepted my path. "Jennifer, could you run a quick errand for us? It's just a small shopping trip." "Naturally, as the daughter-in-law, it falls to you," she declared, thrusting a list into my hands before abruptly shutting the door behind us. Surveying the extensive list she had given me, I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. It was a laundry list of items ranging from everyday essentials like olive oil and vinegar to more extravagant fare like baguettes, drinks, fruits, and even luxury items such as steak and lobster. Clearly, this shopping trip was no small endeavor. I've only visited my in-laws a handful of times and I'm completely unfamiliar with the area. This is quite a hefty list, isn't it? How am I expected to manage carrying all of this on my own? And what about the expenses? It's utterly unreasonable to assume I'll foot the bill for everything. As my husband, who must have overheard the exchange, remains conspicuously absent, I can't help but feel a wave of frustration wash over me. "Hey David, aren't you going to help out?" I call out, standing bewildered outside, awaiting his assistance. Yet to my dismay, all I hear is laughter emanating from within the house. "Ah, I see how it is. I'm being disregarded," I mutter to myself, refusing to be relegated to the role of a mere housekeeper on Christmas. Frustrated by my mother-in-law's blatant demands and my husband's indifference, I make the decision to leave, driving back home in a fit of anger. Determined to salvage what's left of the holiday, I procure food and drinks for a relaxing Christmas at home. However, as I settle in with a beer, I'm startled by an unfamiliar sound emanating from my husband's belongings. Fuming with anger towards my mother-in-law, I stormed off, driving home with my husband's luggage stowed in the car. Among his belongings was his phone, which began incessantly ringing, prompting my curiosity. I had never felt the need to snoop through his phone before, but now, I couldn't resist the temptation to glance at the caller ID. It was a woman's name. As I stood frozen, the call ended and a message notification appeared. With the messages displayed on the screen, I read a series of short sentences that pierced through me. "David, when are you coming back from the in-laws? I'm feeling jealous being here without you. I've put off seeing you for Christmas, but make sure to come to me as soon as you return." My heart sank as the reality dawned on me. My husband was cheating. In that moment, any warmth I felt towards him turned to ice. While I had previously brushed off my mother-in-law's harassment as a minor nuisance due to her infrequent encounters, discovering my husband's infidelity was an entirely different story. There's no way I can continue living in this shame of a marriage. With a sense of urgency, I attempted to unlock his phone, and to my disbelief, the password was my own birthday. Using my own birthday to secure a phone he's using to communicate with his mistress. The audacity. Swiftly, I gathered evidence of his affair. There was no need for a private investigator. His phone held all the damning proof I required. The exchange of messages and the contents of his photo folders painted a damning picture of his infidelity. Now, faced with the reality of his betrayal, I contemplated my next move. In a moment of boldness, I seized his phone and composed a message to his mistress. My wife has gone back to her parents' house after a disagreement, so we have the opportunity to spend Christmas together. Come over, I typed, pretending to be him. Almost immediately, her reply came through. I swiftly responded with our address and awaited her arrival. She promised to be there within an hour, and true to her word, the doorbell rang just 30 minutes later. That was remarkably fast. As I swung open the door, I was met with the unexpected sight of my husband, father-in-law, and mother-in-law standing before me, their expressions betraying a sense of dejection. "Oh, we're back." My mother-in-law's voice carried a somber tone as she and my husband exchanged glances. "What happened to you two? Let us in for now," she continued, gesturing for us to step aside. With a sense of bewilderment, I ushered them into the room. But as they entered, a voice caught my attention, one that didn't belong to my father-in-law. Who could it be? Turning towards the entrance, my eyes fell upon Emma, standing beside none other than my grandmother-in-law, my mother-in-law's own matriarch. I was taken aback by the unexpected appearance of my grandmother-in-law. "What brings you here?" I began, but before I could finish, she interjected, ushering us all inside. "Come on, David, and you too, Jennifer," she said, her tone softened by an apology. "I'm sorry for ignoring you earlier, Jennifer. And David, I apologize for any oversight on my part." Upon closer observation, both my husband and mother-in-law appeared visibly unsettled in her presence. Grandmother-in-law's piercing gaze bore down on them, a testament to her intolerance for wrongdoing and bullying. Though she could be intimidating in her directness, there was an underlying warmth to her character that endeared her to me. I had always admired grandmother-in-law for her candidness and genuine care for those around her. It turned out that Emma had confronted my husband about our absence, noticing our car missing from the parking lot. He had been lounging at home, completely unaware of my departure, to Thetna's inquiry. Enraged, she had interrogated him, and in turn, he had shifted the blame onto my mother-in-law. Thus the truth about the shocking incident came to light. Grandmother-in-law, having been informed of the situation, wasted no time in reprimanding them both. Even my father-in-law, who had been busy cleaning the neighborhood, was taken aback when he heard the story. Meanwhile, I had intentionally turned off my phone, rendering myself unreachable. Concerned for my whereabouts, they had hurried home to find me. As we discussed the unfolding events, the doorbell interrupted our conversation once more. Unsurprisingly, it was her standing on the other side. "Emma, could you please answer the door?" I called out, and in response, there was a sudden commotion followed by voices in dispute. As I observed, my husband's complexion turned pale, signaling the arrival of an unexpected guest. The tension in the room escalated, and I struggled to suppress a rising sense of amusement. The situation reached its climax as the woman my husband believed he had invited attempted to flee, only to be intercepted by Emma and ushered into the room. A collective gasp echoed through the room as everyone laid eyes on her. I too was taken aback, not just by her presence but by her attire, a frilly headpiece and a fluttering miniskirt, resembling that of a maid's uniform. In that moment, the realization dawned on me. Was my husband involved with someone like her? The woman, under the impression that she had been invited by my husband, stood in shock, confronted by a room full of adults. "David, what's happening?" I demanded, my voice tinged with a mix of disbelief and frustration. David hesitated before reluctantly explaining, "Well, you see, this girl is, your mistress, right?" "What? How did you find out?" the mistress exclaimed, her face flushing with embarrassment as she glanced nervously between us. "Yeah, because I saw your phone. I gathered plenty of evidence from photos to messages. I know everything," I interjected, my tone firm and unwavering. At this revelation, the mistress let out a panicked cry, pleading for help from both David and my mother-in-law. The unexpected plea for assistance from my mother-in-law left me stunned, raising more questions than answers. What ensued was sheer chaos. Emma and I grilled my husband about the affair, while my father-in-law and grandmother-in-law sternly questioned my mother-in-law about her mistreatment of me. It was made abundantly clear to all three that their actions were utterly unacceptable, and my mother-in-law was especially condemned for condoning the affair. The most shocking revelation was how my husband came to know the maid. Strangely enough, it was my mother-in-law who played a pivotal role in their encounter. She had developed an interest in maid cafes but felt awkward attending alone. So she enlisted my husband as her companion. They bonded over their shared enjoyment of the performances and began frequenting the cafes together, eventually leading to the affair. What baffled me even more was my mother-in-law's apparent fondness for the mistress and her willingness to turn a blind eye to the affair. I couldn't understand why she would allow her son's infidelity to continue unchecked, especially given the distress it caused me. With the holiday season looming, my husband and I made the difficult decision to divorce before Christmas. It was a choice mirrored by my father-in-law and mother-in-law, who also opted to end their marriage during their time at our place, witnessing 2 divorces in one go. As the proceedings unfolded, the mistress trembled visibly, her demeanor reflecting a mixture of fear and uncertainty. Under Emma's watchful gaze and stern tone, she seemed to shrink with trepidation. Perhaps the notion of marriage had become a source of trauma for her. But that was no longer my concern. After reaching a settlement with my husband, the mistress, and even my mother-in-law, I reclaimed my freedom as a single woman once more. I secured a job and embraced the newfound sense of independence that came with it. Life was good, and I relished the opportunity to chart my own course forward. After the divorce, something unexpected occurred in my life. Emma and I had developed a close bond and become drinking buddies. Today, we plan to go bar hopping together once more. As I made my way to our meeting spot, I noticed someone standing beside Emma. Could that be Emma's boyfriend? Approaching them, the man turned around, and I was stunned. It was my ex-boyfriend, the one who had vanished without a trace. He seemed equally taken aback to see me. "Emma, I'm sorry, but I have to go," I stammered, feeling the surge of emotions welling up inside me. "What? Jennifer, why?" Emma protested, clearly confused by my sudden departure. Without hesitation, I began to run, my ex calling out after me, "Jennifer, wait, let's talk." But I couldn't stop, the rush of emotions propelling me forward, away from the ghosts of my past. At last, the truth from the past came to light. It turned out that my ex-boyfriend's family had endured a string of hardships. His grandmother battled dementia, his father's business collapsed, and his mother suffered from exhaustion due to caregiving responsibilities. Eventually, they had relocated to the countryside to seek refuge with relatives. While his grandmother had since passed away, things had gradually settled down for them. He expressed regret for not having the courage to confide in me about their family struggles earlier. "I understand now, but you should have told me," I responded, acknowledging the difficulty he had faced. Although it was in the past, learning the truth brought a sense of closure and understanding. But the surprises didn't end there. By a twist of fate, I discovered that my ex-boyfriend now worked at the same place as Emma, and they even shared the same shift today.
"Zara, you need to see this. It's Jackson. He's not who you think he is," my niece Mia said, her voice shaking as she showed me a photo on her phone. I stared in disbelief at the image. A candid shot of my husband Jackson with his arm around a tall blonde woman, laughing together at the airport. My stomach dropped. "What? This can't be real," I said, my voice hollow. "I snapped it yesterday when I was picking up my friend from her flight. I knew if I didn't show you, you'd never believe me, Aunt Zara," Mia replied. I felt sick with dread but tried to remain calm. "Did you talk to him? Maybe it's just a misunderstanding." Mia shook her head. "He didn't see me, but from how cozy they looked, I don't think it was just a friend." My mind reeled. Jackson and I had been married for 12 years. Was he really cheating on me? That night at dinner, I cautiously brought it up. "Mia said she saw you with another woman at the airport yesterday," I began. Jackson laughed loudly, making me jump. "Mia's got an active imagination, doesn't she? I picked up a client visiting from Dallas to show her a property. That's all." He scoffed. I searched his face for any hint of deception, but found none. Still, over the next few weeks, doubts plagued me. Jackson worked later, went on mysterious trips, and spent more time texting. One day, acting on impulse, I checked his pockets while doing laundry. In his crumpled pants was a hotel keycard and receipt for a suite at the Sebastian, downtown's most lavish hotel. Fueled by adrenaline, I grabbed my car keys. Time to learn the truth. I arrived at the hotel, hands trembling, and took the elevator to the 5th-floor suite. As I raised my hand to knock, the door swung open, and there was Jackson, half-dressed with the same blonde from Mia's photo. "Cassidy, I thought you were just—" Jackson froze mid-sentence when he saw me. Zara! He cried. What are you doing here? My body shook with rage and anguish. I was right not to trust you, I choked out. The blonde, Cassidy, slunk out, avoiding eye contact. Jackson scrambled for his shirt. Zara, I can explain. Don't bother, I said coldly. Without another word, I turned and strode rapidly toward the elevators, tears stinging my eyes. His web of lies had finally unraveled. My husband was not the man I thought I knew at all. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind racing. How long had Jackson's affair been going on, and how had I never noticed? When I finally returned home, Jackson was waiting on the porch. Thank God, I was so worried, he said, rushing toward me. I backed away, repulsed. Don't come near me, you liar, I said sharply. Jackson's facade crumbled. Baby, I messed up, okay? I didn't mean for it to happen. Save it, I snarled. I saw you with her at the hotel. Her name's Cassidy, right? Jackson paled. Cassidy? She doesn't mean anything to me, Zara. It was just a stupid fling. I fought the urge to slap him. A fling? We're married. How long has this been going on? He turned his gaze downward. I don't know. A few months, maybe? Months, I cried. Blinding fury washed over me. Without thinking, I grabbed my suitcase from the front closet and started throwing clothes inside. Whoa, take it easy, Jackson said, eyes wide. Where are you going? I'm leaving. Obviously, I scoffed bitterly. I'll be at my sister's. Panic flashed across Jackson's face. He blocked my path to the door. Be reasonable, Zara. You don't have to leave. I pushed past him, seething. I won't stay under the same roof as a lying, cheating snake. Jackson chased me to my car. I said I was sorry. I'll end things with Cassidy, I swear. We can get counseling, move past this. I whirled around to face him one last time, tears stinging my eyes. The man I loved would never betray me like this. I don't know who you are anymore. Jackson, we're done. I peeled out of the driveway just as the tears began to fall, leaving Jackson helplessly shouting after me. My heart ached with grief and bitterness, but I refused to let him see me crumble. He wasn't worthy of my tears. Now I knew the painful truth about the stranger Jackson had become. It was time to pick myself back up. I spent the next few days at my sister Ivy's apartment trying to process it all. But my raging mind wouldn't rest. I had to know more, like how Jackson financed his sordid affair when we struggled to save money every month. I met my friend AJ, a tech wizard, for lunch. Can you track someone's credit card purchases without them knowing? I asked. His eyes widened. On the dark web, sure. This about Jackson? I nodded, steeling my nerves. Later, AJ sent me a list of expensive hotel charges over the past 4 months and jewelry purchases. Must be for his mistress, AJ noted. The reality sunk like a stone in my gut. Jackson hadn't just cheated, he'd spent a fortune on Cassidy behind my back. Fury simmered inside me. It was time to uncover the extent of my husband's betrayal. If he thought he could get away with it, he was dead wrong. A few days later, I bought hair dye, preppy clothes, and blue contact lenses, the perfect disguise to follow Jackson unnoticed. I told Ivy I needed to work, but really, I was parked outside Jackson's office, spying from a rental car. At noon, Jackson finally emerged, stopping at the florist. To my disgust, he exited carrying a massive bouquet of roses. He continued downtown, ducking into the Sebastian, the same hotel where I'd caught him with Cassidy. This time, instead of barging into their suite, I discreetly trailed Jackson to the bar where Cassidy waited in a slinky dress that likely cost more than my car. Jackson kissed her, grinning. My blood boiled. Just then, Jackson's phone rang. His face fell. It's the hospital, he told Cassidy. Let me take this outside. As Jackson hurried out, I seized the chance, sliding onto the bar stool beside Cassidy. She glanced at me, puzzled. I know what you're doing with my husband, I said fiercely. Cassidy recoiled. Excuse me? I don't even know you. I'm Zara, Jackson's wife, I said coldly. Cassidy paled, speechless. Before she could respond, Jackson returned, ashen-faced. His eyes darted wildly between us. Zara? He croaked. There's been an accident. My dad. He wavered on his feet. My anger evaporated, replaced by shock. Despite everything, I still cared for him once. I took his arm gently. Come on, I said quietly. Let's get you to the hospital. Cassidy backed away wordlessly into the crowd as I led Jackson outside, holding back my whirlwind of accusations, for now. At the hospital, Jackson collapsed into a chair, head in hands. The nurse said Dad's car was hit by a drunk driver. He's in surgery now, Jackson choked out. My heart ached for him. I clasped his shoulder gently. He'll pull through. Your dad's resilient. Jackson nodded wordlessly. Hours passed with no update. When the nurse finally appeared, her somber expression said it all. Jackson's dad hadn't made it. Jackson dissolved, sobbing uncontrollably. I held him close, letting his tears soak into my shirt. Despite Jackson's ghastly choices, he was still family. Over the next few days, as funeral arrangements were made, I supported Jackson quietly behind the scenes, putting my simmering fury on hold. The day of the funeral came, a small, mournful affair. After the burial, I drove Jackson back to his place so he could change for the wake. But when we pulled up, police swarmed the sidewalk. "What happened?" Jackson asked a cop. "Nasty wreck earlier. Speeding vehicle crashed into that tree. 2 people were critically injured." Dread filled my stomach. As the ambulance pulled away, I spotted a flash of blonde hair on the stretcher. Cassidy. Jackson blanched. He must have realized, too. We followed the police to the hospital and learned Cassidy had been driving Jackson's beloved vintage Mercedes, with Jackson in the passenger seat when she lost control. The officer shook his head. Witnesses said she raced through 2 red lights before crashing. We suspect drunk driving. The news stunned me. Jackson could have died cheating on me with Cassidy. Overwhelmed, I stepped aside to compose myself. A nurse approached with an evidence bag containing Jackson's damaged cell phone cracked from the wreck. "We can hold his personal effects until he's released," she offered gently. On impulse, I took the phone. "I'll handle it, thanks," I murmured. Once Jackson stabilized, they'd transfer him to a regular room. I had time to access his phone, to understand the full picture. I met my friend Ajay at his repair shop and handed him the phone. "Any chance you can get inside this to access text messages and photos?" "Shouldn't be an issue," Ajay said. Within the hour, he'd downloaded the data onto a disk. "I don't know what you're looking for, but seems like this guy's up to no good," Ajay warned. My hands trembled, imagining what secrets the disk held. "That's what I'm afraid of," I said gravely. Alone at home, I loaded the disk on my laptop with trembling hands. Photo after sorted photo filled the screen. Jackson and Cassidy entwined, wearing nothing. Receipts and texts arranging their trysts covered months. Even worse, screenshots showed Jackson transferring money from my personal account into his, thousands of dollars gone. I squeezed my eyes shut, tasting bile. The man I'd loved for 12 years had stolen my money to finance his affair, deceiving me at every turn. It was time to make Jackson face the truth and pay the price for his callous betrayal. Armed with the incriminating data from Jackson's phone, I set up a meeting with my lawyer, Carlos. He scanned through the evidence, eyebrows rising. "This is quite serious," Carlos said. "Illicit transfers from your personal account without permission constitutes fraud and theft. Combined with the affair, you have solid grounds for divorce." My chest tightened. After 12 years together, divorcing Jackson felt unreal. "Let's focus first on freezing your joint accounts before he empties them," Carlos continued. "I'll also file a temporary restraining order. When he's discharged, legally he cannot come near you or the home you share." I nodded, steeling my nerves. The cold machinations now seemed necessary. 2 days later, I sat rigidly in Carlos's office as he made the call, confronting Jackson over speakerphone. "Mr. Kent, I represent your wife, Zara. We have evidence here of fraud and infidelity. As of now, your joint accounts are frozen. You're also legally prohibited from approaching Miss Kent or your shared residence per the temporary restraining order issued this morning." The line went silent. Finally, Jackson sputtered in rage. "Who the hell do you think you are? You can't just lock me out." Carlos glanced at me. "The court order says otherwise, Mr. Kent. Will you comply, or shall I have officers waiting at your discharge?" "You betch," Jackson snarled. "You won't get away with this, Zara. That's my house, too." I flinched but kept my tone cool. "I'm done being your personal ATM, Jackson. Consider this the consequence of your actions." The call ended explosively, with Jackson hurling threats until nurses hauled him away. Shaken, I retreated home, now owned solely by me. For days, tension knotted my stomach as I awaited Jackson's next move. A week later, the doorbell rang. My eyes widened in alarm until I saw Jackson's sister Harper on the video feed. I swung the door open. "Harper, is everything okay?" She shifted on her feet. "Hey, Zara, do you have a minute?" I waved her in, puzzled. Since the funeral, I hadn't seen Harper or the rest of Jackson's family. Harper sat down, not meeting my eyes. "I heard about the restraining order and Jackson cleaning out your accounts." My shoulders slumped as I sank down beside her. You probably think I'm just bitter and crazy, but he was cheating on me for months, Harper, and stealing money to fund his lifestyle with some woman named Cassidy. Harper nodded slowly. I know, I didn't at first, but I overheard Jackson on the phone with Cassidy. The things he said, the way he spoke to her. She shuddered. He was cruel, degrading. I realized I didn't know my own brother anymore. Tears shone in Harper's eyes. My heart twisted in empathy. Betrayal by family cut especially deep. Harper grasped my hand fiercely. You did the right thing escaping from him, Zara. What he did was unforgivable, and I want to help you make sure he doesn't get away with it. Relief washed over me. I wasn't alone anymore in this fight. Harper's solidarity awakened a powerful sense of vindication. With the truth exposed, Jackson would finally reap the misery he'd sown, starting with losing his most precious relationships, the foundation of his deceitful life. In the weeks following my confrontation with Jackson, I leaned heavily on Harper's support. We met often for coffee or wine, hashing out my next moves. Have you decided whether you'll meet him in court or settle outside? Harper asked one evening. I swirled the wine in my glass. Jackson's too volatile for meetings. I'll let the judge force him to pay up. Harper nodded firmly. Good. He deserves the public shame. I sighed. My lawyer says proving the affair gives us leverage for maximum restitution, but rehashing all the sordid details. I shook my head, pained. Harper clasped my hand. You're so much stronger than Jackson gives you credit for, Zara. Don't worry. I'll be right by your side when you face him in court. Her steadfast solidarity bolstered me. With Harper at my side, I could withstand Jackson's wrath long enough to expose his deceit in court. Financial restitution seemed hollow compared to what I'd lost, but hitting Jackson where it hurt most was the only path to justice. A few days before our hearing, Jackson shocked us both by showing up unannounced at my door, ignoring the restraining order. Zara, please, can we talk about this? He implored, clutching wilted flowers. Before I could react, Harper appeared behind me. Get off this property before I call the police, Jackson, she threatened. Jackson's face darkened. Stay out of this, Harper. This is between me and my wife. The possessive way he said my wife made my skin crawl. Harper stepped forward furiously. Former wife, because you decided to lie and steal instead of honoring your vows. I always defended you, Jackson, but now you disgust me. Jackson flushed angrily. You know nothing, Harper. This witch turned my whole family against me. He jabbed his finger at me. My fury boiled over. You did this to yourself, Jackson. Now get out before the cops drag you out. With a menacing glare, Jackson stormed off. I sagged in relief against Harper. Tomorrow, come hell or high water, my ex would get exactly what he deserved. At the courthouse, Harper squeezed my shoulder as we took our seats. I'm right here with you, she murmured. Across the aisle, Jackson sat alone, his eyes swollen and hair disheveled. For an instant, pity tempered my simmering vitriol. Then I remembered the trauma his lies inflicted, and my resolve strengthened. When the judge called my name, I strode forward steadily. I would walk out of here vindicated and finally free from Jackson's poisonous hold. Please describe for the court the events that led to today's hearing, the judge prompted gently. I steadied myself. I learned my husband Jackson was having an affair. When I confronted him, he promised to end things, but he continued sneaking around behind my back. I proceeded to calmly detail Jackson's lies and deceit over months, culminating in stealing my money to fund his lavish outings with his mistress Cassidy. Jackson's lawyer questioned me vigorously, but faltered when I presented the evidence from Jackson's phone. The judge considered me soberly. This deception went on at length. Why stay with a serial philanderer and fraud? I stood taller. Because I loved him once, deeply. I'm here now because his actions forced me to protect myself. The judge nodded and turned to Jackson. Mr. Kent, how do you plead to these allegations of infidelity, fraud, and theft? Jackson burst out of his chair. It's bull, all of it. She's making me out to be a monster over one mistake. He pointed at me, hand shaking. Murmurs filled the courtroom. The judge pounded his gavel sharply. That's enough, Mr. Kent. Maintain composure or I'll hold you in contempt. Jackson slowly sat but glared at me malevolently. I glared back, undaunted. After a painfully long debate, the judge rendered his verdict in my favor. The evidence presented confirms Mr. Kent violated marital trust through chronic infidelity and fraud. As restitution, this court orders an equitable division of assets, including one-time alimony payment to Ms. Zara Kent. He banged the gavel finality. I hugged Harper tightly in dizzy relief. It was over. I was free. At the plaintiff's table, Jackson stood slowly regarding me with icy calmness. "Congratulations, Zara. You won," he said cuttingly. "I hope destroying my life was worth it." Adrenaline coursed through me. I didn't destroy anything. I just revealed the truth, something you could never face. I held his gaze unflinchingly. "We're over, Jackson. This was your doing." His lips curled in a snarl. "You'll regret this, Zara," he spat venomously. Before the bailiffs could react, he stormed out. I stood frozen, pulse thrumming. Harper gripped my shoulder. "Don't let him scare you. His threats are just pathetic attempts at control," she said. "He's the one who needs to move on now." I nodded, shaking off my unease. She was right. Jackson no longer had any hold over me. And once his family and Cassidy realized the truth too, he'd truly be left with nothing. A fitting outcome for his cruelty. In the months following the trial, I finally felt I could breathe again. Jackson vanished from my life just as completely as our marriage had. Only Harper provided glimpses of his downward spiral. His girlfriend Cassidy left him when she found out about the money he owes you, Harper revealed over lunch one day. And without her bankrolling his lifestyle, he's scrambling. I shook my head. After all the warnings about her, now he's alone and struggling? Talk about karma. Harper smiled ruefully. Also, quite the scandal for his career. Clients dropped him when word of the lawsuits got around. While I took no pleasure in Jackson's misery, it was clear he deserved it. And the alimony checks he resentfully sent each month ensured I could rebuild my life. On my birthday a few months later, Harper stopped by with champagne and news. "Cheers to your fresh start," we clinked glasses. "I actually have an update on Jackson's current crash and burn," she added. I raised an eyebrow. His ruined career and relationships were already karmic payback. "So get this," Harper continued, leaning in furtively. "Jackson put his house on the market. He's so desperate for cash, he sold it way under value." My eyes widened. "His dream house that he made me sacrifice for?" "Geez." Almost sheepishly, Harper went on. "Well, funny you should mention sacrifice, because the buyer was Ray Hernandez." I nearly choked on my champagne. "Ray? My ex that Jackson always hated?" Harper nodded, grinning. "Yep, Ray seized the chance to stick it to Jackson, and Jackson was apparently seething, but financial hands were tied." The irony was so absurd I burst out laughing. Jackson's precious house ending up with his nemesis Ray? You really couldn't make this stuff up. In his greed and dishonesty, Jackson had sabotaged everything stable in his life. Now all that remained was facing the music alone. And music never sounded sweeter. "To good riddance," Harper cheered, raising her glass again triumphantly. The relief I'd yearned for was finally here. Freedom from Jackson's toxicity and lies. His bitterness over losing our old house to my ex was just icing on the cake of karma, now enjoying her sweet revenge. And I planned to relish every bite. The day I discovered Richard's affair was like any other, until it wasn't. I, Anna, 32, always considered myself observant, but that day my skills were put to a test I never anticipated. Returning home early from work, I was met with a sight that froze me in my tracks. The garage shutter, always firmly closed, was ajar. Puzzled, I approached cautiously, my heart pounding an erratic rhythm against my chest. Peering inside, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. There, in the midst of our garage, was Richard's prized vintage sports car. And in it, entangled in a passionate embrace, were Richard and a woman I didn't recognize. The audacity of it, in our shared space, was a slap across my face. I stifled a gasp, biting my lip till it hurt. They couldn't know I was there. I needed evidence, something concrete. My mind raced as I struggled to think straight amidst the turmoil of betrayal. Then, as if fate played its hand, Richard's voice cut through the silence. "Come on, the car's too cramped. Let's do it outside next time. Right?" His tone, light and carefree, was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. It was the voice of a man without a care in the world, a man who didn't deserve the loyalty I had given him. I had to act. Moving silently, I grabbed a few of Richard's clothes strewn on the floor and snatched the garage remote control. My hands trembled, but my resolve was firm. I pressed the button and the shutter began its slow descent. "You too? So ardently engaged like monkeys. Deserve to be left just as you are, with nothing on, fitting for your behavior," I whispered to myself, a bitter taste in my mouth. I left the garage, closing them in their disgrace. I couldn't bear to stay a moment longer. The evidence in my hand was my ticket to freedom from this sham of a marriage. I had always known that Richard had a penchant for theatrics, but this was a new low. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the disrespect, the utter disregard for our marriage vows. As I walked away, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, betrayal, but above all, a burning desire for retribution. Richard had made his bed, and now he was going to lie in it. This wasn't just the end of our marriage, it was the beginning of his downfall. I was going to make sure of that. In the quiet of my office the next day, my mind incessantly replayed the previous night's events. Every casual smile and tender word from Richard now seemed like a carefully crafted performance. How long had I been living in this facade? I sat there, looking at the desktop background, a photo of us on our wedding day. It felt like looking at two strangers. I deleted it with a click, a small but liberating act. The memories of our life together took on a different hue now. Richard, with his charming smile and words, had always been particular about appearances. Our home, an aging yet elegant house, was chosen by him for its character, he had said. But now I saw it for what it was, a stage for his performance. I recalled the day he brought home that vintage sports car, a purchase that came out of nowhere. "It's a man's dream," he had proclaimed. That car, which cost more than a small house, was his pride and joy. Now, it was nothing more than a symbol of his vanity and deceit. As my professional facade held up at work, my personal life crumbled. I was a successful marketing director, known for my sharp strategies and keen insights. But at that moment, I felt like a fool. Fooled by a man I trusted with my heart. The memory of an encounter with Richard at a corporate event a few months ago resurfaced. He was the center of attention, laughing and socializing with his usual flair. I had seen him exchange numbers with a young woman, but he had brushed it off as a business contact. How naive I had been. The day wore on, and every interaction felt like a chore. My colleague Mark noticed my distraction. "Everything okay, Anna?" he asked, genuine concern in his eyes. I forced a smile. "Just a long day," I replied, masking my turmoil. As I drove home, my thoughts were interrupted by a call from Richard. His voice, once comforting, now grated on my nerves. "Hey, love, running late tonight. Don't wait up," he said casually. "Sure," I replied, my voice steady. I wasn't going to confront him yet. I needed a plan, something that would hit him where it hurt the most, his ego and his wallet. That night, alone in our bed, I made a decision. Richard's betrayal wasn't just going to be the end of our marriage, it was going to be the start of his undoing. I was going to dismantle the life he so carefully built, piece by piece. Sitting in the dim light of my living room that evening, I initiated the plan I had been meticulously crafting. The laptop on my knees displayed the login screen to our home security system, a system Richard had installed for the safety of his precious car. Logging in, I navigated to the garage camera footage. My heart raced as I hit play, watching the scene unfold with a cold detachment. There they were, Richard and that woman, Lily, entangled in their sordid affair. The footage was damning, undeniable evidence of his betrayal. I downloaded the video, a digital weapon in my arsenal for the impending legal battle. Richard's reputation, his precious image, was about to be shattered. The next day at work, I was a shell of my usual self, my mind constantly on the impending confrontation. Mark approached my desk with a hesitant step. "Anna, you've been off. Anything I can do?" I shook my head, forcing a half smile. "Just a tough project. Thanks, though." As the day dragged on, my resolve only strengthened. Richard was not going to get away with this unscathed. That evening, Richard returned home with his usual carefree demeanor. "Hey, babe, I picked up Chinese for dinner. Thought you'd like a break from cooking." His words, once sweet, now felt like poison. I sat down at the dining table, my expression unreadable. "We need to talk, Richard." He paused, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "Everything okay?" I pushed my laptop across the table, the video queued up. "Why don't you tell me?" Richard's face paled as the video played. His eyes darted from the screen to my face, searching for some sign of forgiveness. "Anna, this isn't what it looks like," he stammered, his usual eloquence gone. I leaned back, my voice calm but laced with venom. "Oh, I think it's exactly what it looks like, Richard, you cheating on me, in our own home." Richard scrambled for words, his mask crumbling. "It was a mistake. I love you, Anna. We can work through this. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Work through this? There's nothing left to work through. I want a divorce, Richard, and I want you to suffer for what you've done. His face contorted in a mix of anger and panic. You can't do this to me. Think about our reputation, our social standing. That's all you care about, isn't it? Your precious reputation. Well, it's about to come crashing down. I stood up, my decision final. I'll be contacting my lawyer in the morning. I suggest you do the same. Richard sat there, a defeated man, as I walked away. The web of lies he had woven was unraveling, and I was going to make sure it ensnared him in the end. In the days that followed, my home felt like a battleground, charged with silent tension and unspoken words. Richard tried to regain control, alternating between desperate pleas and veiled threats. But I was unmoved, my resolve as firm as steel. At work, I maintained my professional facade, but the weight of the situation was a constant shadow. During a meeting, I found my thoughts drifting, only to be brought back by Mark's concerned voice. Anna, you sure you're okay? You seem distracted. I brushed it off with a strained smile. Just a lot on my mind. I'll be fine. But the truth was far from it. I was planning my next move, a move that would ensure Richard paid for his betrayal. The more he tried to sweet-talk his way out of the situation, the more resolute I became. One evening, as Richard returned from work, his usual mask of confidence was replaced by an air of defeat. He slumped into a chair, looking at me with weary eyes. Anna, can't we talk about this? I know I messed up, but we can fix it. His words fell on deaf ears. I had heard enough of his lies. There's nothing left to discuss, Richard. I've made up my mind. He leaned forward, desperation in his voice. You're going to destroy everything we've built. Think about what people will say. People? Is that all you care about? What about us, Richard? What about our marriage? He fell silent, unable to answer. His concern for public image had always overshadowed our relationship. The next day, I sought solace with Mrs. Harper, my mentor and confidant. She listened intently as I poured out my heart. You need a break from all this, Anna, she advised. Why not take that international project? Get away for a while. The idea was appealing. A chance to escape the suffocating atmosphere at home and put some distance between Richard and me. I made the decision. I was going to take the project and use the opportunity to gather my strength for the impending legal battle. It was also a chance to rebuild myself away from the shadow of Richard's deceit. That evening, I informed Richard of my decision. His reaction was a mix of surprise and frustration. You're leaving now? In the middle of all this? Yes, Richard. I need to focus on my career, something you clearly never respected. He watched helplessly as I packed my bags. For the first time, I saw a hint of fear in his eyes, fear of losing control, fear of facing the consequences alone. As I left for the airport, I felt a sense of freedom. The distance would give me perspective and strength. Richard's web of lies had been torn apart, and now it was time to rebuild my life on my terms. The international project was a breath of fresh air, a much-needed escape from the stifling situation back home. Immersed in work, I found a renewed sense of purpose and strength. Each successful meeting, every new connection, was a step towards reclaiming my independence. However, Richard's shadow loomed large, even miles away. His texts and calls, a mix of pleading and anger, were relentless. I responded only when necessary, keeping my replies brief and emotionless. One evening, after a particularly long day, my phone buzzed with yet another call from Richard. I hesitated but answered, bracing myself for another bout of emotional manipulation. Anna, where are you? This is getting ridiculous. You can't just run away from our problems. Richard's voice was strained, a mix of frustration and desperation. I replied coolly, I'm not running away, Richard. I'm focusing on my career, something I should have done a long time ago. You're abandoning our marriage over one mistake. You're being unreasonable, he retorted. A mistake? Richard, you betrayed our marriage. This isn't just a simple error you can sweep under the rug. His voice rose, tinged with anger. You're destroying our life over your pride. Come back and we can sort this out. We'll go to therapy, do whatever it takes. I could almost see him, the charming man I married, trying to weave his web of lies again. But that man was long gone. It replaced by the reality of who he truly was. Therapy won't fix what you broke, Richard. I'm filing for divorce. It's over. There was a moment of silence, and then his voice, now colder. You'll regret this, Anna. You're making a huge mistake. I ended the call, a sense of finality washing over me. It was clear now. There was no salvaging what was left. Richard was only concerned about his image, his comfort. He didn't truly care about us or our marriage. Back in my hotel room, I looked out at the city lights reflecting on the path ahead. The divorce would be messy, no doubt. Richard would fight it, perhaps out of spite or fear of losing his public persona. But I was ready for it. I had gathered enough evidence, and with my career thriving, I was financially secure. As the days passed, I grew more determined. Richard's attempts to reach out became more infrequent, his messages a mix of self-pity and veiled threats, but they no longer affected me. I was moving forward, leaving the shadow of our failed marriage behind. Upon my return, the reality of my crumbling marriage hit me like a tidal wave. The house, once a symbol of our shared dreams, now felt like a prison of memories best forgotten. I moved into a modest apartment, a space that was mine alone, free from Richard's deceitful presence. The day of our final confrontation arrived sooner than I expected. Richard, looking more disheveled than I had ever seen him, had requested to meet under the guise of discussing the terms of our divorce. As I sat across from him in the sterile environment of a lawyer's office, I felt a surge of power. This was my territory, my rules. Richard started with his usual charm, but there was a hint of desperation in his voice. "Anna, can't we settle this amicably? Think about the years we spent together." His words were like echoes from a past life. "Amicable? After what you've done? You must be joking," I replied, my voice steady. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, then leaned forward. "What do you want, Anna? Money? The house? Just name it." I looked him straight in the eyes. "I want justice, Richard. You don't get to buy your way out of this." His facade cracked, revealing the selfish man I had come to know. "You're ruining my life over this. I hope you're happy." "Happy? No, Richard, but I will have peace knowing you can't hurt me anymore." The negotiation was tense, with Richard trying to manipulate every term in his favor, but I stood my ground, backed by solid evidence and a resolute legal team. As we neared the end of the meeting, Richard's demeanor changed. He was no longer the confident man I had married. Instead, he was a man cornered by his own actions, lashing out in a futile attempt to regain control. "This is a mistake, Anna. You'll regret this," he hissed, his eyes dark with anger. "I already regret many things, Richard. Letting you control my life for so long is one of them. This divorce is not a mistake. It's a correction." With the final papers signed, I walked out of the office feeling lighter than I had in years. The chains of our toxic marriage were finally broken. Richard had lost more than just a wife. He had lost the respect of his peers, the facade of the perfect husband, and soon he would face the full consequences of his actions in the eyes of the law and society. I had not only survived Richard's betrayal, but emerged stronger, more determined. The chapter of my life that included him was closed, and a new, promising chapter was waiting to be written. The months following the divorce were a whirlwind. I had successfully navigated the legal labyrinth, emerging victorious but not unscathed. The divorce was more than just a legal separation. It was a reclaiming of my identity, my independence. In my new apartment, each morning brought a sense of renewal. I relished the freedom, the quiet, and the space to think and plan my future. My career, which had always been a source of pride, now became my focus. I dove into my work with a renewed vigor, finding solace in my achievements. News of Richard's downfall spread like wildfire. His reputation, once his most prized possession, was now tarnished. His professional life suffered as clients and colleagues distanced themselves. The man who had thrived on control and appearances was now struggling to keep his world from crumbling. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had sold the vintage sports car, a symbol of his vanity, to cover legal expenses. It was a poetic end to the object that had once been a catalyst for our downfall. One evening, as I sat sipping coffee in my living room, I reflected on the journey. The pain, the betrayal, and the fight had transformed me. I was no longer the woman who had naively believed in Richard's lies. I was stronger, wiser, and more determined. A call from Mrs. Harper, who had been my rock throughout the ordeal, interrupted my thoughts. "Anna, how are you holding up?" "Better than ever," I replied, a genuine smile on my face. "That's wonderful to hear. You know, there's an opening for a senior position in the company's overseas branch. I think you'd be perfect for it." The offer took me by surprise. It was an opportunity I had always dreamed of but never pursued, held back by the confines of my marriage. I don't know what to say, Mrs. Harper. It's a big step. A step you're more than ready for, Anna. You've proven your strength and resilience. It's time to take on the world." I let the words sink in. This was more than just a job offer. It was a chance to start anew, to build a life on my terms, free from the shadows of the past. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steady with resolve. "It's time for a new adventure." As I ended the call, I looked around my apartment, a space that had become my sanctuary. It was time to leave it behind, to embark on a new journey. Richard's betrayal had shattered my world, but in its place I had built something stronger, something truly my own. As I packed my bags for the move, I felt a sense of excitement for the future, a future that was mine to shape. The day was overcast, the kind of gloomy weather that seemed fitting for a funeral. As I stood there, surrounded by mourners, I couldn't help but reflect on the life of Charles, my father-in-law. He had been a kind man, a pillar in the community, and his absence left a void that was palpable in the air. I glanced over at Michael, my husband, standing rigid as the chief mourner. His face, usually unreadable, today seemed like an emotionless mask. I wondered, not for the first time, what thoughts were hiding behind that facade. The funeral procession was a grand affair, much like Charles himself. He was a man who had touched many lives, and it showed in the number of people who had come to pay their respects. As I listened to the eulogies, a mix of sorrow and admiration filled the air. Charles had been not just a family man, but a mentor, a friend to many. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, Michael leaned in and said, almost too casually, "I hope to be sent off like this too, surrounded by family and many acquaintances. Laura, I'll pick out some BGM, so count on you to handle it." His words struck me as odd, given the solemnity of the moment. It was typical of Michael to think about himself even in the face of his father's death. I felt a surge of anger, but managed to keep my voice steady. "Who are you to say that? Ask your real family for that. After all, we're just a family for show, right?" "I don't owe you that much," I retorted, my voice laced with bitterness. Michael's face, usually so composed, faltered for a moment. "What are you talking about, Laura?" "Oh, nothing," I replied, a cold smile playing on my lips. "Just a bit of a reality check. I know all about your secrets, Michael." His eyes widened slightly, and I could see a hint of panic flickering in them. It was a rare moment of vulnerability, one that I savored. "Everything Dad left behind will be inherited by me, his son," Michael said, his voice betraying a hint of desperation. I couldn't help but laugh, a short, humorless sound. "Is that what you think?" "You're about to face a much greater hell, Michael." The truth about Michael's secret life was about to unravel, and with it, the facade of our marriage. I knew that the coming days would be tumultuous, but I was ready to see Michael get what he deserved. As we left the cemetery, I took one last look at Charles's grave. He had been the only person in Michael's family who had shown me genuine kindness. And for his sake, if nothing else, I was determined to see this through to the end. The past few years with Michael flashed before my eyes as I sat in our quiet, almost desolate living room. I remembered the hesitant joy I felt when we decided to marry. I was 25 then, young and perhaps a bit naive. Moving in with his parents, Charles and Evelyn, seemed like a daunting step, but their warmth made it easier. I had quit my job at 28, hoping to start a family and support Charles, whose health was declining. Life had a semblance of normalcy then, with the occasional laughter and the routine challenges of a young wife. But the signs were there, subtle at first, like the ripples before a storm. Michael's late nights at work, the weekend trips he claimed were for business, and the ever-growing distance between us. One night, as Michael slept, his phone buzzed incessantly. Driven by a suspicion I couldn't shake off, I checked it. The texts were from a woman named Sophia, filled with intimate words and plans for their next rendezvous. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of anger, betrayal, and sorrow flooding through me. The next morning, over breakfast, I decided to confront him. "Michael, who's Sophia?" I asked, my voice deceptively calm. He choked on his coffee, coughing. "What? Who's Sophia?" "Don't play dumb. I saw the messages. Who is she?" I pressed, my voice rising. Michael's face hardened. It's nothing. Just work stuff. You're being paranoid? I slammed my hand on the table, causing our son Alex to look up from his cereal. Don't lie to me, Michael. I read the messages. They were anything but work stuff. He glared at me, his eyes cold. You had no right to go through my phone. That's a violation of my privacy. Privacy? Is that what you call cheating on your wife? I spat back, feeling a bitter taste in my mouth. Michael stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to explain myself to you. You're just a housewife. What would you know? I felt a sting at his words, but I held my ground. A housewife who's been keeping your home, raising your son while you gallivant around with some mistress. I deserve better than this, Michael. He snorted. You deserve better? You're lucky to have me. Without me, you're nothing. His words cut deep, but they also ignited a fire within me. I knew then that our marriage was beyond salvaging. It was time for Michael to face the consequences of his actions. The tension in the house was palpable after the breakfast confrontation. Michael had left in a huff, and I was left to ponder my next move. It was clear that our marriage was a sham, a facade that I could no longer maintain. The evidence of Michael's affair was not just a betrayal. It was the catalyst for a much-needed change. I decided to take action, starting with a call to Evelyn, who had always been more of a mother to me than a mother-in-law. Evelyn, we need to talk. It's about Michael, I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. What's wrong, dear? Evelyn's voice was laced with concern. It's Michael. He's having an affair, I said bluntly, the words tasting bitter. There was a pause on the other end, a heavy silence that spoke volumes. I had my suspicions, but I didn't want to believe it. Evelyn finally replied, her voice tinged with sadness. We agreed to meet in person to discuss everything. I knew this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey. Later that day, Michael returned home, his demeanor one of forced nonchalance. So, have you calmed down now? He asked, a mocking tone in his voice. I looked at him, my resolve hardening. Calm? No, Michael. I'm far from calm. I've decided what to do next. And what's that? He asked, a smirk playing on his lips. I want a divorce, Michael. I can't be part of this lie anymore, I stated, my voice unwavering. Michael's smirk disappeared, replaced by a look of disbelief. Divorce? You think you can just decide that on your own? It's not just my decision. Your actions made it inevitable, I countered. He laughed, a cold, harsh sound. You think you can survive without me? You're nothing but a housewife, Laura. You have no idea how the world works. That may be, but I'd rather face the world alone than live another day in this sham of a marriage. And I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are, I retorted, the words fueled by years of pent-up frustration and hurt. Michael's face turned red with anger. You wouldn't dare. Oh, I would. And I will, I said, a sense of empowerment rising within me. This was the tipping point, the moment when the facade crumbled and the battle lines were drawn. I was ready to fight for my dignity, for my son's future. Michael had underestimated me for far too long. It was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. In the days following my declaration, the house became a battleground of icy silences and sharp exchanges. Michael's arrogance was palpable, but I was undeterred. Armed with the evidence of his infidelity, I started to plan my next moves. Evelyn was my rock during this time. She, too, was disillusioned with her son's actions. I never raised him to be this way, she confessed during one of our many late-night talks. Charles would have been devastated to see what Michael has become. I nodded, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. We'll get through this, Evelyn. We'll make sure he doesn't get away with it. My first step was to meet with the lawyer Charles had introduced me to years ago. He was an old family friend and was appalled by Michael's behavior. We'll make sure he pays for this, he assured me, his eyes steely. We started by cutting Michael off from Charles's inheritance. The will was clear, and with Charles's recent amendments, Michael's entitlement was reduced to a pittance. This hit him hard. He had always assumed he would inherit a significant sum, and the reality of his situation was a bitter pill to swallow. The news of his affair and his subsequent disinheritance spread like wildfire. I made sure of it. His reputation, both within our social circles and at his workplace, began to crumble. The smug, confident man I had married was now a shadow of his former self, his arrogance replaced by a desperate, almost pitiable, need to salvage his image. But I didn't stop there. You won't get a penny in alimony, I told him during one of our confrontations, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are. Michael's response was a mix of anger and disbelief. You can't do this to me. I'm your husband. You were my husband, I corrected him coldly. Now, you're just a man who betrayed his family. Evelyn supported me every step of the way. We became a united front against Michael, a team determined to see justice served. And as the legal proceedings began, it became clear that Michael was fighting a losing battle. His attempts to turn the tide were feeble and easily countered. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his pleas fell on deaf ears. He was a man undone, his actions catching up to him in the most spectacular of ways. As I watched him flounder, a part of me felt vindicated. This was the karma he deserved. But there was no joy in it, only a deep sense of sorrow for what could have been and a determination to build a better future for Alex and myself. The finality of the divorce proceedings brought a sense of closure, yet the aftermath was anything but simple. Michael, stripped of his inheritance and his dignity, was a mere shadow of the man he once was. His downfall was not just legal and financial, it was a total collapse of the facade he had built around himself. Evelyn and I watched as Michael's world unraveled. He had lost his job, a consequence of the scandal and his tarnished reputation. His once lavish lifestyle was now a distant memory, replaced by mounting debts and a stark reality that he had never prepared for. One evening, as I sat with Evelyn in the living room, a sense of peace settled over me. We did it, Evelyn. We showed him he couldn't just walk over us, I said, a small smile on my lips. Evelyn nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of sadness and strength. Yes, we did. Charles would have been proud of you, Laura. You stood up for yourself and Alex. Speaking of Michael, she continued, I never imagined my own son would end up like this. But he made his choices, and now he has to live with them. Michael's attempts to cling to his old life were futile. He moved in with his mistress, but their relationship was strained, built on lies and false promises. The news of their struggles reached us through the grapevine, tales of arguments and an impending eviction due to unpaid rent. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my life with Alex. He was my priority, my beacon of hope in the midst of the chaos that had engulfed our lives. I found a part-time job, a modest but honest way to contribute to our household and provide for my son. Evelyn was a constant source of support, her wisdom and experience guiding me through the toughest of times. Together, we created a new normal, one where the pain of the past was a memory, not a daily burden. One day I received a call from Michael's mistress. Her voice was laced with desperation. Laura, please, can you help us? Michael, he's lost everything. We have nothing. I listened, feeling a mixture of pity and resolve. I'm sorry for what you're going through, but Michael's choices led you both here. I have to think about my son now. Hanging up, I realized how far I had come. The Laura who had once feared confrontation was now a woman who stood her ground, who had faced adversity and emerged stronger. As I looked at Alex playing in the garden, a sense of hope filled me. We had weathered the storm, and now it was time to look forward to brighter days. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready for it, armed with the strength and resilience I had discovered within myself. What's with that expression, Elaine? You look like you've seen a ghost, he sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. Derek, I can't do this anymore. Your constant belittling, your complete disregard for my feelings, it's suffocating me. Derek laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. Oh, please. You're being dramatic. You knew what you were getting into when you married me. A woman of your limited capabilities should be grateful. Grateful? The word echoed in my mind, mocking me. I thought back to the days when we first met. I was 27 then, full of ambition and dreams, working diligently in the marketing department of a bustling firm. Derek, with his charming smile and seemingly kind demeanor, had swept me off my feet. We met at a company event, and he was all I had ever wanted, or so I thought. But now, standing in our meticulously kept living room, I barely recognized the man before me. The kind and attentive Derek I had fallen in love with was gone, replaced by this cold, calculating person who seemed to take pleasure in my misery. You think I should be grateful? I challenged, my voice steadier than I felt. Grateful for a husband who sees his wife as nothing more than a maid? Who values his ego over our relationship? Derek's face darkened. You know your place, Elaine. You gave up your job to be my wife, to take care of me in this house. That was your decision. Yes, it was my decision, I shot back, feeling a surge of anger. A decision I made because I believed in us, in our partnership. But this is not a partnership, it's tyranny. He scoffed. Dramatic as always. You should know by now, Elaine, I'm the one who makes the decisions here. If you can't handle the simple tasks of a housewife, maybe you should reconsider your position in this marriage. Reconsider my position? The words hit me like a physical blow. All the years of putting his needs before mine, of enduring his criticisms and dismissals, of trying to be the perfect wife he demanded, it all came crashing down in that moment. I straightened, meeting his gaze head-on. No, Derek, it's you who should reconsider. I'm not your property, and I refuse to be treated as such any longer. I deserve respect, and if you can't give me that, then maybe this marriage was a mistake. The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air between us. Derek's face was a mask of shock and anger, his eyes burning into mine. So that's how it is? He said finally, his voice low and dangerous. You think you can just walk away? You think you can survive without me? I took a step back, feeling a flicker of fear, but I pushed it down. I don't just think it, Derek. I know it. I'm not the scared, timid woman you think I am. I'm stronger than you know, and I won't be broken by your cruelty. For a moment, Derek looked as if he might say more, but then he turned on his heel and stormed out of the room, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and a newfound determination. I knew this was just the beginning, that the road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. I would find my way out of this. I would rediscover the woman I used to be, the woman I was meant to be. And Derek would come to regret ever underestimating me. The days following our confrontation were a blur of icy silences and veiled insults. Derek's contempt for me had become more apparent, his mask of charm and affection long since discarded. One evening, as I prepared dinner in our pristine kitchen, Derek sauntered in, his eyes scanning the spread with an air of disdain. Is this what you call a meal? It looks as unappetizing as it probably tastes. I clenched my fists, feeling a familiar surge of frustration. I've done my best, Derek. It's not easy managing everything around here on my own. He snorted, picking at the food with a fork. Your best? That's laughable. You really are useless, aren't you? I work all day to provide for us, and this is the thanks I get? A mediocre dinner from a mediocre wife. His words stung, but I refused to let him see my pain. I'm not your servant, Derek. I'm your wife. I deserve some respect, some appreciation. Derek looked up, his eyes cold. Respect? For what? Keeping the house barely presentable? Even that seems to be beyond your capabilities. And don't even get me started on your lack of skills in the kitchen. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I don't know why I bother trying. Nothing I do is ever good enough for you. You bother because it's your duty, he replied sharply. And you're right, it's never good enough. Maybe I made a mistake marrying someone so clearly out of her depth. His words echoed in my mind long after he left the room. I looked around at the house I had meticulously maintained, the meals I had painstakingly prepared, all for a man who couldn't care less. A sense of hopelessness washed over me, but beneath it there was a growing ember of anger, a burning need to prove him wrong. Later that week, I found myself confiding in Mara, my closest friend and confidant. Over coffee, I poured out my heart, the words spilling out in a torrent of frustration and despair. He doesn't see me, Mara. He doesn't see the effort, the love I put into everything. It's like I'm invisible, I said, my voice breaking. Mara reached across the table, her hand warm on mine. Elaine, you're so much more than he makes you out to be. You're strong, talented, capable. You don't need his validation to know your worth. Her words were a balm to my wounded soul, and in that moment something shifted within me. I realized that I had been seeking approval from a man who was incapable of giving it. I had been diminishing myself, trying to fit into the mold of the perfect wife he demanded, at the expense of my own identity. From that day on, I began to reclaim pieces of myself that I had lost along the way. I started secretly working on my graphic design skills, a passion I had abandoned for the sake of my marriage. With each design I created, I felt a sense of empowerment, a reminder of who I was before Derek tried to define me. And as I grew stronger, Derek's attempts to belittle me became less effective. His words still hurt, but they no longer had the power to break me. I was building a foundation for a new life, one where I was the architect of my own destiny. The atmosphere in our home had become a battlefield of unspoken words and simmering resentments. Derek's disdainful remarks had escalated, each one aimed to diminish and control me. But something within me had changed. The once cowering woman was slowly giving way to someone stronger, more defiant. One evening, as Derek arrived home, his usual air of self-importance was more pronounced. He dropped his briefcase by the door and surveyed the living room with a critical eye. "This place is a mess. What have you been doing all day?" I stood up, feeling a surge of defiance. "I've been working, Derek, on my graphic design projects." He laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Working? You call that a job? It's a hobby at best, Elaine. Don't flatter yourself." His words were meant to wound, but I stood my ground. "It's more than a hobby. I'm building something for myself, something that doesn't revolve around pleasing you." Derek's expression darkened. "You're getting bold, aren't you? Remember your place, Elaine. You're my wife. That's your primary role." I met his gaze, my voice steady. "My place is not just as your wife. I am my own person, with my own dreams and aspirations." He moved closer, his presence dominating the space. "You have no dreams outside of this house. I provide for you. I give you everything you need. You should be grateful." Grateful. That word again. It echoed in my mind, mocking me. Grateful? For being treated like a possession? For having my aspirations and efforts constantly belittled? No, Derek. I'm not grateful. I'm suffocated. For a moment he seemed taken aback, his facade slipping, but he quickly regained his composure, his voice laced with venom. "You're nothing without me, Elaine. You think you can survive on your own? You'll come crawling back, begging for my forgiveness." His words were meant to break me, but they only fueled my resolve. "I won't be crawling back to you, Derek. I'm stronger than you think." As the days passed, my secret work on graphic design projects became my sanctuary. Each piece I created was a testament to my creativity and resilience. My conversations with Mara became more frequent, her words of encouragement, a lifeline in the storm that was my marriage. I knew that leaving Derek would not be easy. He had woven a web of control and dependence that I had unwittingly stepped into. But with each passing day, the web was loosening, the hold he had on me weakening. I began to plan my escape, each step calculated and deliberate. I opened a separate bank account, securing my earnings from my freelance work. I reached out to a lawyer, discreetly inquiring about the divorce process. But most importantly, I began to rebuild the self-esteem that Derek had so systematically tried to destroy. I looked in the mirror and saw not a broken woman, but someone who was slowly piecing herself back together, someone who was ready to fight for her freedom. And as I lay in bed each night, listening to Derek's steady breathing, I knew that the time for whispers of rebellion was coming to an end. Soon it would be time for bold action, for reclaiming the life that was rightfully mine. The morning sun cast a warm glow through the curtains, but the atmosphere in our house remained cold and unyielding. Derek's contempt had become a daily ordeal, but my resolve had only strengthened. As I sat at the kitchen table, working on a graphic design project, Derek entered, his expression one of derision. "Still playing at your little hobby, I see. When will you realize it's pointless?" I didn't look up from my screen. "It's not pointless, Derek. It's my career, and it's thriving, unlike your opinion of it." He scoffed, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "A career? Don't make me laugh. You're a housewife, Elaine, nothing more. Your place is here, taking care of me, not indulging in these childish fantasies." I felt a flash of anger but kept my composure. My place is wherever I choose it to be, and right now it's here, building a future for myself. Derek slammed his cup down, coffee splashing over the rim. "You have no future outside of this house, Elaine. I won't allow it." His attempt to intimidate me was evident, but I no longer felt the fear that once gripped me. "You don't get to decide my future, Derek. I'm not your property. I'm a person with my own dreams and ambitions." He leaned in, his face inches from mine, his voice a menacing whisper. "You'll never succeed. You're weak, dependent on me for everything. You'll come crawling back, mark my words." I stood up, meeting his gaze. I won't be crawling back to anyone, Derek. I'm stronger than you'll ever know. The days that followed were a tumultuous mix of silent treatments and bitter arguments. Derek's attempts to belittle me became more desperate, his words more cutting. But with each barb, my determination only grew. My work as a graphic designer was gaining traction, my designs being noticed by larger clients. I was building a portfolio that spoke of talent and creativity, a far cry from the hobby Derek so scornfully dismissed. Mara, ever my pillar of support, was a constant source of encouragement. "You're doing amazing, Elaine," she would say. "You're proving him wrong every single day." And she was right. With each project I completed, each client I impressed, I was rewriting the narrative Derek had tried to impose on me. I was no longer the voiceless shadow in his life. I was becoming a force in my own right. The turning point came one evening, as Derek returned from work. He found me in the living room, my laptop open, displaying a particularly intricate design I had just completed. He glanced at the screen, a sneer forming on his lips. "What's this? Another one of your little projects?" I looked up, a sense of pride swelling within me. "Yes, it's my latest project, and it's not little. It's for a major client, one who recognizes my talent." Derek's sneer faltered, his eyes betraying a flicker of surprise. "A major client? I don't believe you." I stood, closing my laptop with a satisfying snap. "Believe it or not, Derek, it's true. I'm succeeding, despite your constant attempts to undermine me. I'm building a life for myself, a life where I don't need your approval or your support." For a moment, there was silence, the tension between us palpable. Then Derek turned and walked away, his usual retorts unspoken. It was a small victory, but a significant one. I knew that the battle was far from over, but for the first time I felt a real sense of hope. I was taking back control of my life, one step at a time, and with each step I was moving closer to freedom, to a future where I was the master of my own destiny. The day had arrived when the facade of our marriage could no longer be upheld. The air was thick with anticipation, a prelude to the storm that was about to erupt. Derek came home to find me packing my belongings, my graphic design equipment neatly stored in boxes. His face registered shock, then anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Elaine?" I continued packing, my hands steady. "I'm leaving, Derek. I can't stay in this toxic environment any longer. I'm suffocating." He laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "Leaving? To go where? You think you can survive out there without me? You're delusional." I zipped up the last bag, turning to face him. "I'm not delusional, Derek. I'm awake. I've realized that I don't need you to survive. In fact, I'm better off without you." His face contorted in rage. "You'll come back. You'll see how hard it is, and you'll come crawling back to me." I shook my head, a sense of liberation washing over me. "I won't be coming back. My work as a graphic designer is taking off. I have clients, projects, a career. I'm not the helpless woman you think I am." Derek stepped closer, trying to intimidate me. "You think you're something special because you've got a few clients? You're nothing, Elaine. You'll always be nothing without me." I stood my ground, my voice firm. "I'm not nothing, Derek. I'm more than you ever gave me credit for, and I'm going to prove it." He reached out, attempting to grab my arm, but I stepped back. "Don't touch me, Derek. It's over. I'm leaving, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." For a moment, he looked like he might lash out, but then he composed himself, his voice dripping with disdain. "Fine, leave. See if I care. You'll be begging to come back before you know it." I picked up my bags, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. I won't be begging for anything. Goodbye, Derek. As I walked out the door, I didn't look back. The weight of the years of belittlement and control seemed to fall away with each step I took. I was embarking on a new journey, one where I was in control of my destiny. I knew the road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face the world on my own terms, ready to show Derek and anyone else who doubted me that I was capable, strong, and independent. And as I drove away from the house that had been my prison, I felt a surge of empowerment. I was no longer Elaine, Derek's wife. I was Elaine, the graphic designer, the artist, the survivor. In the weeks following my departure, I found both solace and challenge in my newfound independence. My career as a graphic designer flourished, each project a stepping stone towards greater achievements. Meanwhile, Derek's world was unraveling, his true nature exposed for all to see. One afternoon, Mara called me with unexpected news. "Elaine, have you heard about Derek?" I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to know. "No, what happened?" "He's been fired," Mara said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Apparently, his performance had been declining for months, and after you left, it just got worse. He's lost his job." I felt a mix of shock and vindication. Derek, who had always prided himself on his career, now faced the consequences of his arrogance. "I can't say I'm surprised," I replied. "He was so focused on controlling me that he let his own life fall apart." "But that's not all," Mara continued. "He's been trying to reach out to you. He's called me a few times, asking if I knew where you were." I felt a chill run down my spine. Derek's persistence was unsettling, but I was determined not to let it shake me. "I've moved on, Mara. He's a part of my past now." In the following days, Derek's attempts to contact me became more desperate. He left voicemails, sent emails, each one oscillating between pleas for reconciliation and angry accusations. But I stood firm, ignoring his attempts to drag me back into his toxic orbit. As my career took off, I was invited to showcase my work at a prominent design exhibition. It was a moment of triumph, a testament to my hard work and talent. I stood among my peers, my designs displayed for all to see, feeling a sense of accomplishment that I had never experienced with Derek. The exhibition was also where karma made its grand appearance. Derek, looking disheveled and defeated, showed up unannounced. He approached me, his eyes searching for some semblance of the control he once had. "Elaine," he started, his voice unsteady. "I need you. I've lost everything. Please, take me back." I looked at him, seeing the man I once thought I loved, now just a shadow of his former self. "Derek, you haven't lost everything. You threw it away. You chose your ego over our marriage, your pride over our happiness." He reached out, but I stepped back. "Please, Elaine, I'll change. I'll do anything." I shook my head. "It's too late, Derek. I've moved on. I've found success and happiness, things I could never have with you." As I walked away, leaving Derek standing alone amidst the crowd, I realized that this was my final goodbye. The chapter of my life that included Derek was now firmly closed. In the months that followed, I heard snippets of Derek's continuing downfall. He struggled to find work, his reputation tarnished by his own actions. The man who once held himself so high had fallen, a victim of his own making. Meanwhile, my career soared. My designs were featured in magazines, my client list grew, and I found joy in my work that I had never known before. I had turned my life around, not just surviving, but thriving. As I sat in my new studio, surrounded by my artwork and the accolades of my hard-earned success, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The sun streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow over the room, mirroring the lightness I felt in my heart. Mara visited me that afternoon, her face bright with a smile as she looked around. "Elaine, you've done it. You're truly an inspiration." I smiled back, a sense of contentment washing over me. "It's been a journey, Mara, but every step was worth it." We sat down with cups of coffee, the aroma blending with the scent of fresh paint and paper. "Do you ever think about Derek?" Mara asked cautiously. I paused, the memories surfacing briefly. "I do, sometimes, but not with anger or regret. He was a part of my path, a difficult chapter that led me to where I am now." Mara nodded, understanding in her eyes. "And now you're free, living the life you were meant to." "Yes," I agreed, gazing out the window. "Free to create, to live, to be me. Derek's hold on me, his attempts to diminish me, they're just echoes of the past now." The conversation shifted to my upcoming projects, the excitement of new challenges and opportunities. But as Mara spoke, I found my thoughts drifting back to the person I was when I was with Derek. That Elaine was like a distant shadow, a reminder of how far I had come. After Mara left, I took a moment to savor the quiet of my studio. The struggles, the pain, the liberation, they had all woven together to create the tapestry of my life. And in that tapestry, the dark threads served only to make the bright colors shine even brighter. I realized then that my story was not just about escaping Derek's shadow. It was about discovering my own light, the strength, resilience, and talent that had always been within me, waiting to be acknowledged and embraced. As the day gave way to evening, I looked at the designs lining the walls of my studio. Each one was a piece of me, a part of my journey. I had not only survived, I had thrived. and in thriving I had found a peace that was more profound than any revenge. The chapter of my life with Derek had ended, but my story was just beginning. A story of triumph, of finding joy in the midst of sorrow, of rising from the ashes to create something beautiful. As the last rays of the sun faded, I turned off the lights in my studio and stepped out into the cool evening air. The world lay before me, vast and full of possibilities. And I, Elaine, once a shadow, now a source of light, was ready to embrace whatever came next. The evening air was tense, a prelude to the storm brewing in our living room. "What do you mean she's moving in tomorrow?" I asked Greg, my voice barely containing the shock and anger. Greg didn't even flinch. "It's decided, Elise. Mom's coming to live with us. It makes sense, especially now." "How can you make such a decision alone?" I countered, feeling the walls of our home closing in on me. "What about our plans, the rooms?" He had that all-knowing look, the one that always set me on edge. "We'll convert your home office. It's the only logical solution." "My office? Greg, that's my space, my sanctuary." "You don't really need it," he said dismissively. "Besides, I pay the rent here, $3,000 a month. That gives me a say in how we use the space." I was stunned. This house, the one my parents had passed down to me, now felt alien, controlled by Greg's financial hold over it. "But this is my family home," I whispered, more to myself than to him. Greg's voice was cold, devoid of the warmth I once fell in love with. "Your family home or not, I'm the one footing the bills now. Get your stuff cleared out by tomorrow." That night, I couldn't sleep. The realization that our marriage was a facade, built on the shaky grounds of financial power and silent submission, hit me hard. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my office being emptied. Marion, Greg's mother, arrived with her suitcases, an unwelcome guest in my own home. In the days that followed, the tension escalated. Marion's presence was overbearing. She rearranged the kitchen, criticized my cooking, and worst of all, she had this way of subtly belittling me in front of my daughter, Mia. I felt like a stranger, tiptoeing around my own life. Greg became more distant. His conversations were curt, his nights late. Our home, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, now echoed with the sounds of unspoken resentments and forced politeness. One evening, I overheard Greg and Marion discussing finances. "Elise doesn't contribute much anyway," Marion scoffed. "She should be grateful we're letting her stay." I felt a surge of anger. This was my family home, a place of cherished memories, now being reduced to financial transactions and power plays. The next morning, I confronted Greg. "I want to talk about the rent," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "This was my family's home. I never agreed to pay rent." Greg's response was a mix of arrogance and indifference. "Well, things change, Elise. I'm paying the bills, so technically it's more my house than yours now." That was the moment I knew. Our marriage, a delicate balance of love and compromise, had crumbled under the weight of control and disrespect. I called my father, Nolan, my voice shaking. "Dad, I need your help. It's about Greg." As I hung up, I realized that this was just the beginning. I wasn't going to let Greg and Marion turn my life into their dominion. They might have underestimated me, thinking I'd crumble under their control. But they were wrong. I was my father's daughter, and I knew a thing or two about standing my ground. Sitting in the empty room that used to be my office, I couldn't help but reminisce about the early days with Greg. We were like two pieces of a puzzle, fitting perfectly with our differences. But now, those differences were tearing us apart. I remembered our first date, how Greg's laughter had echoed in the autumn air, how he had looked at me as if I was the only person in the world. It was hard to reconcile that memory with the man who had just usurped my family home. My phone buzzed, pulling me back from the past. It was a text from my father, Nolan. "I'll take care of it. Meet me at the shop tomorrow." Nolan's auto repair shop had been a staple of my childhood. It was more than a business. It was a testament to his hard work and dedication. That shop, much like our family home, held memories of a life once filled with warmth and togetherness. The next day, I walked into the familiar scent of oil and metal. Dad was under a car, his hands expertly moving as he worked. "Dad," I called out. He slid out, wiping his hands. "Elise, let's talk in the office." The office was a small room filled with trophies from car shows and framed photos of our family. It was a capsule of happier times. I can't believe Greg is doing this, Dad said, his eyes reflecting a mix of anger and concern. I sighed. I know, Dad. I think it's time for some payback. Dad nodded, a determined look crossing his face. What do you have in mind? I want Greg and Marion out of the house, but I want to do it legally, make them feel the pinch of their actions. Dad leaned back in his chair, pondering. We can draw up a rental agreement, hike up the rent, make it impossible for them to stay. I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. This was the first step in reclaiming my life, but it also meant declaring war on Greg and Marion. Let's do it, I said, the resolve in my voice surprising even me. Over the next few days, Dad and I worked on the rental agreement. It was a meticulous and strategic plan, designed to legally corner Greg and Marion. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction imagining their faces when they'd see the new terms. Meanwhile, back at the house, Marion's true colors began to show more vividly. She complained about everything, from the way I dressed Mia to the brand of coffee I bought. Her words were like needles, subtle but piercing. One evening, I overheard her on the phone. Yes, I've finally got a lease under my thumb. This house will be ours soon. Fury and disbelief coursed through me. How could she be so callous, so manipulative? But her words also steeled my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting Mia from this toxic environment. The day came to present the rental agreement to Greg and Marion. I walked into the living room, the document in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. Greg, we need to talk about the house, I said, my voice steady. He looked up, surprised. What about it? I handed him the document. It's the new rental agreement. You need to read it. As Greg's eyes scanned the pages, I saw a range of emotions flicker across his face. Confusion, disbelief, and finally anger. This is absurd. The rent's been raised tenfold. Yes, I said, meeting his gaze. It's the market rate for this property. If you can't afford it, you'll have to find somewhere else to live. Greg's face turned red, his anger palpable. You can't do this to us. I can, and I am, I replied, feeling a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. This is my family home, Greg. You've forgotten that, but I haven't. The days following the presentation of the rental agreement were a blend of silent battles and open confrontations. Marion's true nature, once hidden under a veil of polite intrusion, now emerged in full force. One evening, I was setting the table for dinner when Marion entered the kitchen. Her eyes quickly scanned the room, landing on the simple yet nutritious meal I had prepared. This is what you call dinner, she scoffed. Back in my day, we knew how to provide for our families properly. I clenched my teeth, forcing a polite smile. It's healthy, and Mia likes it. Marion snorted, dismissing my efforts with a wave of her hand. Children don't know what's good for them. It's up to us to teach them. Clearly, you lack that understanding. Her words stung, but I remained composed. I had learned that reacting to Marion only fueled her disdain. As the days went by, Marion's presence became more oppressive. She criticized my parenting, my housekeeping, even my choice of clothes. It was as if she was deliberately trying to provoke me. One afternoon, I returned home from a quick errand to find Mia in tears and Marion sitting calmly in the living room, reading a magazine. What happened? I asked, rushing to comfort my daughter. Your child is just being fussy, as usual, Marion replied without looking up. I don't have the patience for such nonsense. I held Mia close, feeling a surge of protective anger. How could she be so cold towards her own granddaughter? Later that week, I had a meeting with a potential client for my small business. Marion, could you please watch Mia for a couple of hours? I asked, hoping for a bit of cooperation. Marion looked at me, her expression one of annoyance. Fine, but make it quick. I have plans later. I returned from the meeting to find Mia once again in distress. Marion was nowhere in sight. After calming Mia down, I confronted Marion. Where were you? I trusted you to look after her. Marion rolled her eyes. I had to step out for a bit. She was sleeping, anyway. What's the big deal? The big deal was that Marion's selfishness was now affecting Mia, my most precious treasure. I realized then that Marion would never change. Her contempt for me had spilled over to Mia, and I wouldn't tolerate it any longer. I called my father that night, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and determination. Dad, it's getting worse. She's not just targeting me now. She's neglecting Mia. Nolan's response was swift and resolute. We need to speed up our plan. It's not safe for you and Mia there anymore. The following day I saw Greg and Marion whispering in the living room, their heads close together in conspiracy. "What are you two plotting now?" I asked, a hard edge to my voice. Greg looked up, his expression one of feigned innocence. "Just discussing some financial matters. Nothing for you to worry about." But I knew better. The rental agreement had unsettled them, and now they were scrambling. I could almost smell their desperation, a scent that, under different circumstances, might have been satisfying. Instead, I felt a cold resolve settling in my heart. They had underestimated me, thinking I would crumble under their pressure. But they were wrong. I was ready to fight back, not just for myself, but for Mia. The battle lines were drawn, and I was no longer just a passive player in their game of control. I was about to change the rules entirely. Every day in the house felt like walking on a tightrope. Marion's presence loomed large, a constant source of negativity. Her comments were like thorns, pricking away at my patience and resolve. One evening, as I put Mia to bed, I overheard Marion speaking to Greg in hushed tones in the living room. "Elise is not fit to be a mother. She's too soft, too indecisive. You need someone who can actually run a household efficiently." I stood frozen, listening to their conversation. Greg's reply was a weak agreement, a betrayal that cut deeper than any of Marion's sharp words. The next day, I confronted Greg. "Do you really think I'm a bad mother?" I asked, my voice shaking. Greg avoided my gaze. "It's not just about being a mother, Elise. It's about being responsible, about being adequate." Adequate. The word echoed in my mind, a stinging indictment of my role in this family. As the days passed, Marion's manipulations grew bolder. She rearranged the furniture to her liking, disposed of items she deemed unnecessary, and took over the kitchen, effectively pushing me to the margins of my own home. One day I came home to find Mia crying inconsolably. Marion was in the kitchen, completely ignoring her. "Why aren't you attending to her?" I demanded, my heart racing with worry. Marion shrugged, a cold detachment in her eyes. "She needs to learn to soothe herself. It's part of growing up." That night I called my father, my voice a mix of anger and desperation. "I can't do this anymore, Dad. Greg and Marion are destroying everything I hold dear. I need to get out." Nolan's response was immediate and firm. "You and Mia come stay with me. We'll sort this out." I hesitated. Leaving the house meant giving up the fight, but staying meant subjecting Mia and myself to more torment. The decision crystallized the next morning when I found my personal belongings boxed up in the garage. Marion had decided they were cluttering the house. That act of violation was the final straw. I packed our essentials, taking one last look at the home that had once been a haven of love and happiness. As I closed the door behind me, a sense of relief washed over me. I was leaving behind the oppressive walls of that house, but I was also stepping into the unknown. Staying with my father brought a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. Mia's laughter returned, filling the house with joy. But the battle was far from over. I met with my lawyer to discuss the divorce. "I want full custody of Mia," I stated firmly, "and I want the house back." The lawyer nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We'll build a strong case. You have rights, Elise." As the legal proceedings began, I realized this was more than just a divorce. It was a fight for my identity, for my daughter's future, and for justice against the tyranny of Greg and Marion. Greg's reaction to the divorce papers was a mix of shock and anger. "You're making a mistake, Elise. You won't win this." But I was resolute. I had tolerated, endured, and sacrificed enough. It was time to reclaim my life and protect my daughter from the toxic environment Greg and Marion had created. I was no longer the passive, accommodating Elise. I was a mother, a fighter, and I was ready to take back control. The divorce proceedings were a cold, calculated dance of legal maneuvers and emotional confrontations. Greg's shock at my decision to leave quickly turned into a bitter determination to fight back. I sat in the lawyer's office, reviewing the documents. "He's contesting the custody of Mia," I said, my voice laced with disbelief. The lawyer nodded solemnly. "He's also challenging your claim to the house. But we have a strong case, Elise." As the legal battle ensued, my resolve hardened. This was no longer just about leaving a failed marriage. It was about standing up against the injustice and manipulation I had endured. In the midst of this, my father and I finalized our plan for the rental agreement. It was a strategic move designed to legally compel Greg and Marion to vacate my family home. One afternoon, I arrived at the house to deliver the new rental terms. Greg and Marion were waiting, their expressions a mix of defiance and curiosity. I handed Greg the document, watching his face as he read through it. His eyes widened in disbelief. "This is ridiculous. You're increasing the rent to an exorbitant amount." "Yes, Greg," I replied calmly. "That's the market rate for a property of this size and location." Marion interjected, her voice shrill with panic. "You can't do this to us, Elise. This is our home." "No, Marion," I countered, standing my ground. "This is my family home. You and Greg have made it clear that I'm not welcome here. So if you wish to stay, these are the new terms." Greg slammed the document on the table, his anger palpable. "We'll fight this. You won't get away with it." But behind his words, I sensed his fear. The realization that they were losing control was dawning on them. As I left the house, a bittersweet feeling enveloped me. I had taken a significant step in reclaiming my home, but the sight of Mia's abandoned toys in the living room reminded me of the personal cost of this battle. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal appointments and emotional upheaval. I clung to Mia, her innocence and love, my anchors in the storm. During one of the hearings, Greg's true colors came to the forefront. "Elise is unstable, Your Honor," he claimed. "She's not fit to be a sole custodian." I listened, my heart pounding, as my lawyer countered his baseless accusations, with evidence of my stable income and loving relationship with Mia. In a subsequent meeting, Greg's lawyer proposed a settlement. Greg is willing to relinquish his claim to the house in exchange for joint custody and a reduction in the rent. I hesitated, torn between the desire to end this battle and the need to protect Mia from Greg and Marion's toxic influence. But then I remembered Mia's tears, Marion's callousness, and Greg's betrayal. This was no longer just about winning a legal battle. It was about justice and setting an example for my daughter. "I refuse," I said firmly. "I will not compromise on Mia's well-being or my family home." The decision to continue the fight was a difficult one, but it was necessary. I was no longer the woman who tolerated disrespect and manipulation. I was fighting for my rights, for my daughter's future, and for the dignity that Greg and Marion had tried to strip away from me. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready for whatever came next. The day of the final confrontation arrived like a storm on the horizon. Armed with the legal documents, I stood at the doorstep of what used to be my sanctuary, now a battleground. Greg opened the door, his face a mask of defiance. Marion hovered behind him, her eyes betraying her anxiety. "What do you want, Elise?" Greg asked, his tone icy. "I'm here to finalize the arrangements," I said, handing him the updated rental agreement. As he read, his expression shifted from confidence to disbelief. "This is absurd. You're demanding a rent that's beyond unreasonable." "It's the market rate for a property of this size in this location," I replied, my voice steady. "If you can't afford it, you'll have to vacate." Marion stepped forward, her voice trembling. "You can't do this to us. We have nowhere else to go." "That was your choice when you decided to push me out of my own home," I said, meeting her gaze. Greg slammed the document on the table. "We'll see what the court has to say about this. You're not going to get away with trying to evict us from our home. This ceased being your home when you chose to disregard my rights and my feelings," I retorted. The air was thick with tension, the once familiar living room feeling like a foreign land. I looked around, memories flooding back, of laughter, of love, of a life that once was. Now it was just a shell, housing bitterness and betrayal. As I turned to leave, Marion's voice stopped me. "Elise, please. We can negotiate. There must be a way to resolve this." I paused, considering her words. Then, with a resolve that surprised even me, I said, "There's nothing left to negotiate. You made your decision when you chose to side with Greg against me and Mia." With that, I walked out of the house, leaving behind the echoes of a life that no longer existed. The days that followed were a mix of relief and uncertainty. The legal proceedings were grueling, but my resolve never wavered. I was fighting for my dignity, for my daughter, for the justice that had been denied to me. Eventually, the court ruled in my favor. Greg and Marion were given a month to vacate the property. The news hit them like a tidal wave, washing away the last vestiges of their control and arrogance. I watched from a distance as they moved out, their belongings a testament to their shattered dreams and misplaced ambitions. In their eyes, I saw the realization of their defeat, the understanding that their manipulations had backfired. As I stepped back into my family home, now empty of their presence, a sense of peace enveloped me. It was not the peace of victory, but the peace of justice served. I walked through each room, reclaiming the space that had once been ours, mine and Mia's. The walls that had witnessed so much pain now stood as silent sentinels to a new beginning. I knew the road ahead would be challenging. There would be wounds to heal, memories to reconcile. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope. I had fought against the odds, stood up to the tyranny of Greg and Marion, and emerged stronger. This was more than just a legal victory. It was a reclaiming of my life, a testament to the strength I never knew I had. The dust had settled, the legal battles were over, and the once turbulent house was now calm. As I stood in the empty living room, the memories of what had transpired echoed in the silence. Mia played in the corner, her laughter a balm to my weary heart. Watching her, I realized that this struggle, though fraught with pain, was necessary. It wasn't just a fight for a house. It was a battle for our future, for our peace. The day Greg and Marion left, I saw a glimpse of realization in their eyes, a dawning understanding of the consequences of their actions. Marion looked back at the house, her expression one of loss and regret. Greg, defeated and subdued, didn't meet my gaze. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I returned to my small business, finding solace in the familiar routine and the support of my regular customers. Mia thrived in the newfound stability, her resilience a testament to the strength of our bond. One afternoon, as I was closing the shop, a familiar face appeared at the door. It was Greg. He looked different. The arrogance had left his eyes, replaced by a certain humility. "Elise," he began awkwardly, "I wanted to apologize for everything." I listened, a mix of surprise and skepticism. "Why now, Greg?" He sighed, a deep, weary sound. "Losing the house, the divorce, it made me realize how wrong I was, how much I lost because of my pride and my mother's influence." I considered his words, the years of pain and struggle flashing through my mind. "Your apology doesn't change what happened, Greg. But I accept it, for Mia's sake." Greg nodded, a look of relief passing over his face. "Thank you, Elise, and I'm sorry, truly." As he walked away, I felt a chapter of my life closing. Greg's apology didn't erase the past, but it offered a closure, a finality to the turmoil we had endured. In the months that followed, I renovated the house, turning it into a home once again. The walls were repainted, the rooms refurnished, and new memories were made. It was a sanctuary for Mia and me, a place of healing and growth. I often sat on the porch, watching Mia play in the yard, reflecting on our journey. The challenges had been immense, but they had also revealed a strength I never knew I possessed. I had stood up against injustice, fought for my rights, and reclaimed my life from those who sought to control it. It was a journey of self-discovery, of learning to trust in my own strength and resilience. In the end, this was more than just a story of revenge. It was a tale of empowerment, of rising above the trials and tribulations to forge a better future for myself and my daughter. The house, once a battleground of conflict and manipulation, was now a haven of peace and hope. It was a reminder that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most rewarding victories. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the yard, I held Mia close, grateful for the journey that had brought us here. We had overcome, we had triumphed, and we were finally home. "Did you really think you could just move your parents into our home without asking me, Ryan?" I asked, my voice quivering with a mix of anger and disbelief. Ryan, my husband of 6 years, looked up from his laptop with a smirk that I had grown to despise. "Oh, Amelia, don't be so dramatic. It's just for a while, and besides, it's not like you have a say in this." His words felt like a slap in the face. The house, a charming 2-story nestled in a quiet suburb, wasn't just any house. It was the home my grandparents had left me, the place where I'd planned to raise our son, Lucas, away from the toxicity of Ryan's family. "You do remember that this house is in my name, right?" I retorted, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Ryan's expression faltered, his smugness giving way to a flicker of uncertainty. As our 2-year-old Lucas toddled into the room, I forced a smile for his sake. He was blissfully unaware of the tension, his chubby hands reaching up towards me. Scooping him into my arms, I kissed his forehead, trying to calm the storm inside me. I'm not okay with this, Ryan. Your parents, they've never respected me or our space. Why now? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Ryan shrugged, his indifference stoking my frustration. They're family, Amelia. You wouldn't understand. Family. The word echoed in my mind mockingly. My own family, who ran a small but beloved coffee shop in town, had always been my sanctuary. They were nothing like Ryan's controlling, overbearing parents. The doorbell rang, interrupting our standoff. Through the peephole, I saw them. Ryan's parents, suitcases in tow, ready to invade our life. My heart sank. Fine, Ryan, let them in. But this isn't over, I hissed, handing Lucas to him before opening the door. Amelia, darling, cooed Ryan's mother, sweeping past me without a second glance. His father followed, a stern man who'd barely acknowledged me since our wedding day. As they settled in, making themselves comfortable in my living room, I felt a sense of intrusion that was all too familiar. This was just the beginning, I realized. But as I watched them, something within me shifted. I was done being the compliant daughter-in-law, bending to their whims. I retreated to the kitchen, my mind racing. This was my home, my sanctuary, and I was ready to fight for it. The following days turned into a blur of unwelcome changes. Ryan's mother, Elaine, had a way of making her presence known in the most suffocating manner. She rearranged my kitchen, criticized my parenting, and treated our home as if it were her own. Lucas shouldn't be eating that, Amelia. It's not healthy, Elaine chided one morning as I prepared Lucas's breakfast. I bit back a sharp retort, feeling the familiar sting of her judgment. He's fine, Elaine. It's just cereal. She'd skied, shaking her head. In our house, we believe in a proper diet. You really should learn. Her comments were like needles, each one pricking at my patience. Ryan, as usual, was of no help, buried in his work and oblivious to the growing tension. One evening, as I put Lucas to bed, Elaine barged into his room. He's still not sleeping through the night? You must be doing something wrong. Her words were a slap in the face, undermining my efforts as a mother. I'm doing the best I can, I snapped, unable to contain my frustration. Elaine's eyes narrowed. Clearly, your best isn't good enough. Maybe if you had a real job and some structure in your life. I felt a surge of anger. This is my house, Elaine. You're a guest here. Don't forget that. Her laugh was cold and dismissive. Oh dear. Ryan never mentioned how delusional you are. This is his house too, and as his mother, I've every right to be here. The following day, I reached my breaking point. I found Elaine in Lucas's room, going through his drawers. What do you think you're doing? I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. I'm just organizing. This room is a mess, she replied, not even bothering to look at me. That's it! I want you out of my house now! I exclaimed, feeling a mix of fury and desperation. Elaine turned to face me, her expression one of mock surprise. Your house? Oh, sweetie, you're just the wife. This is Ryan's house too, and he wants us here. I stormed out of the room, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Ryan's betrayal, Elaine's intrusiveness, the way they dismissed my feelings, it was all too much. I was tired of being pushed around, tired of having my home invaded by people who had no respect for me. That night, as I lay in bed, a plan began to form in my mind. I was going to take back control of my life, my home, and my son's future. Ryan and his parents had crossed a line, and it was time for them to learn that I wasn't going to be their doormat any longer. The fight was just beginning, and I was ready. A few days later, Ryan dropped a bombshell during an already tense dinner. My parents need to stay with us longer. Their house is undergoing renovations, he said, nonchalantly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I felt my blood boil. Longer? Ryan, we never discussed them staying in the first place, he shrugged, avoiding my gaze. It's just for a few more weeks. What's the big deal? The big deal? The big deal is that your mother treats me like an intruder in my own home. I snapped, my frustration reaching its peak. Elaine, overhearing our conversation, chimed in with her usual condescending tone. Amelia, you're overreacting. We're family. You should be more accommodating. That night, sleep eluded me. Their words echoed in my mind, fueling a growing resolve. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. It was time to fight back. The next morning, I called my brother, Alex, who had always been my confidant. They're taking over my life, Alex. I can't take it anymore, I confessed, choking back tears. Alex's voice was firm and supportive. Amelia, you need to stand up for yourself. Don't let them bully you. It's your house, your rules. His words were the push I needed. I decided to confront Ryan, but this time I would be prepared. I gathered evidence of Elaine's overbearing behavior, the rearranged kitchen, the disrupted routines, her constant belittling comments. Confrontation day arrived. I waited until Elaine and Ryan were in the living room. We need to talk, now, I announced, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Ryan looked up, surprised by my tone. What's this about, Amelia? It's about your parents, Ryan. Their constant interference, their disrespect for my boundaries. It ends today, I declared, holding up my list of grievances. Elaine scoffed. This is ridiculous. We're just trying to help. Help? By undermining me at every turn? By treating me like I don't matter in my own home? I countered, my anger palpable. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Amelia, they're my parents. We can't just kick them out. No, Ryan. They're guests in my home and they've overstayed their welcome. Either they leave or I do. With Lucas, I ultimatumed, my resolve unwavering. The room fell silent, the gravity of my words hanging in the air. I saw the flicker of realization in Ryan's eyes, but it was Elaine who spoke first. You wouldn't dare, she hissed, her facade slipping. Watch me, I retorted, my voice laced with determination. That night, Ryan's parents packed their bags. As they left, Elaine shot me a venomous look. You'll regret this, Amelia. But as the door closed behind them, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was the first step in reclaiming my life, and I was ready for whatever came next. The days following Elaine and her husband's departure were eerily quiet. Ryan's demeanor had shifted to one of cold detachment, his interactions with me minimal and strained. I found solace in the peace of my reclaimed home and the joyous laughter of Lucas. One evening, as Lucas played with his toys, Ryan announced, I've got to go on a business trip. I'll be gone for a few weeks. His tone was indifferent, as if our strained relationship had taken a backseat to his career. Fine, I replied curtly, barely concealing my relief at the prospect of his absence. After Ryan left, the house felt different, liberating even. I started to revert the changes Elaine had imposed, each alteration feeling like a small victory. But the true turning point came when I stumbled upon a series of emails on Ryan's laptop, which he'd carelessly left open. They detailed an affair, an ongoing betrayal that cut deeper than any of his mother's snide remarks. Anger, hurt, and a sense of betrayal churned within me. I decided it was time for Ryan to face the consequences of his actions. I began to meticulously plan my next moves, each step calculated to ensure that Ryan and his family paid for their deceit and manipulation. The first step was to secure my financial and legal standing. I contacted a lawyer, explained my situation, and started the proceedings for what was now an inevitable divorce. Next, I turned my attention to the house, the symbol of my grandparents' legacy and my independence. I reached out to a real estate agent. I want to sell the house, quickly and quietly, I told her. She was taken aback but sensed the urgency in my voice. Are you sure about this, Amelia? This is a big decision, she cautioned. I've never been more sure of anything, I replied with a resolve born of betrayal and a newfound strength. The house went on the market, and within days, offers began to roll in. The thought of Ryan returning to find his precious control stripped away brought a bitter satisfaction. In the midst of this, I reconnected with my family, drawing strength from their support. My parents were appalled by Ryan's behavior and rallied around me and Lucas. We're here for you, no matter what, my father assured me. As I watched Lucas play, innocent and unaffected by the turmoil, I made a silent vow to protect his happiness at all costs. Ryan's return loomed on the horizon, but I was no longer the woman he had left behind. I was ready to confront him, armed with the truth and a plan to reclaim my life. The day Ryan returned was marked with a tension that hung thick in the air. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind, envisioning every possible outcome, yet my heart raced as I heard his key turn in the lock. Amelia, I'm home, Ryan called out, his voice echoing through the now unfamiliar space. I emerged from the kitchen, my posture rigid. Welcome back, Ryan. We need to talk. He glanced around, noticing the changes I had made. What's going on? The house looks different. I didn't flinch. I sold the house, Ryan. It's no longer ours. his face contorted with disbelief. You did what? You can't just sell our house without telling me. It's my house, Ryan, and after what I discovered, I don't think you have a say in it anymore, I said, my voice steady but laced with a simmering anger. He scoffed, trying to regain his composure. What are you talking about? The affair, Ryan, I know everything, I revealed, watching as his facade crumbled. His attempt at denial was weak and short-lived. Amelia, it's not what you think. I think it's exactly what it looks like. You betrayed me, our family, I retorted, the hurt evident in my tone. Ryan's expression shifted from shock to anger. You're overreacting. We can work through this. There's no we anymore, Ryan. I've filed for divorce, I declared, handing him the papers. The ensuing conversation was a blur of accusations and denials, but I stood my ground. The man I had married was gone, replaced by a stranger fueled by selfish desires. As he stormed out, vowing to fight the divorce, I felt a sense of liberation mixed with apprehension. I had taken the first step towards a new life, but the battle was far from over. In the following weeks, the reality of our situation became public. Ryan's parents, once so imposing and confident, were now caught in the crossfire of their son's indiscretions. Their attempts to contact me were met with silence. I had severed all ties, focusing solely on Lucas and the finalization of the divorce. The day of the court hearing arrived. Ryan looked defeated, the weight of his actions finally dawning on him. As the judge granted the divorce and custody of Lucas to me, I felt a sense of justice. Ryan's plea for reconciliation after the hearing fell on deaf ears. You made your choice, Ryan. Now live with it, I said, turning away from him for the last time. The news of our divorce and Ryan's affair spread, affecting his reputation and relationships. His parents, once so proud and judgmental, were now shunned by those who had once respected them. As I walked out of the courthouse, holding Lucas's hand, I realized that this was not just an end, but a new beginning. A fresh start for me and my son, free from deceit and manipulation. The future was uncertain, but it was ours to shape. Life after the divorce felt like emerging from a long, dark tunnel into the light. I had regained control, not just of the house, which was now sold, but of my life. Lucas, blissfully unaware of the adult complexities, thrived in the love and stability I provided. My days were busy but fulfilling, with my focus now on rebuilding our lives and managing the coffee shop, which had become my sanctuary. However, the shadow of Ryan and his parents lingered. One day, as I was closing the shop, Ryan appeared, looking disheveled and desperate, a stark contrast to the composed man I had once known. Amelia, please, I need to talk to you, he pleaded, his eyes searching mine for a hint of the compassion that once existed. I hesitated, the sight of him stirring a mix of emotions. What do you want, Ryan? It's about the alimony and child support, he began, his voice tinged with embarrassment. I can't afford it. My job. I lost it because of the scandal, and my parents, they're broke too. His words were like a cold splash of reality. That's not my problem, Ryan. You made your choices, and now you have to face the consequences. But Amelia, I have nothing left. I'm begging you, for old time's sake. His voice broke, revealing the depth of his despair. I felt a pang of pity, but it was quickly overshadowed by the memory of his betrayal. Old time's sake? Those times are gone, Ryan. You should have thought about the consequences before you cheated and lied. I turned to leave, but his next words stopped me in my tracks. I'm sorry, Amelia. Truly, I am. I was a fool, and I ruined everything. Please, help me. For a moment, I saw the man I had once loved, vulnerable and regretful. But the pain he had caused was too deep, the betrayal too raw. I'm sorry, Ryan, but I can't help you. You need to figure this out on your own, I said firmly, closing the chapter of our shared past for good. As I walked away, leaving Ryan standing alone, I felt a sense of closure. The journey had been painful, filled with betrayal and heartache, but it had led me to a place of strength and independence. Life moved on. Lucas grew, his laughter and curiosity filling our home with joy. The coffee shop flourished, becoming a hub of warmth and community. And as for me, I found contentment in the simple pleasures, the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of Lucas's giggles, and the support of friends and family. Ryan and his parents became distant memories, their legacy a cautionary tale of the consequences of betrayal and selfishness. My journey had taught me the power of resilience and the importance of standing up for oneself. As I locked the shop that evening, I looked up at the sky, its hues of orange and pink signaling the end of another day. I smiled, holding Lucas's hand tightly. Our future was uncertain, but it was bright. We were moving forward, one step at a time, into a new chapter of our lives. The room was filled with an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Mark, my husband of 30 years, sat across from me, his eyes glued to the TV, ignoring my presence as usual. I sat there, lost in my thoughts, feeling the weight of years of unspoken grievances and suppressed anger. I had reached my limit. "Did you finish moving?" Mark's voice, tinged with his usual condescension, pierced the silence. I didn't look at him as I replied, "I'm leaving, Mark." My voice was calm, but inside a storm was raging. Mark scoffed, "Oh, really? And where will you go, Anna? You can't survive without me." His words stung, but they also fueled my resolve. For too long I had endured his dismissive attitude and his mother's incessant meddling. It was time to reclaim my life. "I'll manage," I said, standing up. I felt empowered despite the fear and uncertainty that lay ahead. His mother, who had been living with us for the past year, walked in, her eyes narrowing as she saw my packed bags. "Running away, are we?" she sneered. "I knew you didn't have the spine to handle this family." Ignoring her, I grabbed my bags and headed towards the door. Mark didn't move to stop me. Instead, he called out, "You'll be back. You need us." As I stepped out of the house, I felt a sense of liberation. The cool evening breeze felt like a balm to my suffocated soul. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. For 30 years, I had played the dutiful wife to Mark, a man who saw me more as a convenience than a partner. Our son Alex was the only light in my life, but even he couldn't fill the growing void in my heart. Mark's mother, with her constant criticisms and manipulations, only added to the toxicity of our home. I found a small apartment, modest but peaceful. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe and think without judgment. In the following days, I ignored the barrage of calls and messages from Mark and his mother. They fluctuated between pleading and threats, but I was done listening. My coworkers at the library, where I had worked part-time for years, were supportive. They had seen the changes in me, the gradual loss of my spirit. Now, they witnessed my rebirth. One evening, as I was settling into my new routine, my phone rang. It was Alex. "Mom, are you okay?" His voice was laced with concern. "I am, Alex. Better than I've been in years," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm proud of you, Mom. Dad and Grandma, they're not taking it well. Dad's been drinking, and Grandma won't stop talking about how you've abandoned them." A pang of guilt hit me, but I pushed it away. "They'll manage, Alex. They need to learn to respect others." Alex was silent for a moment. "I'm glad you're finally thinking about yourself, Mom. Let me know if you need anything." As I hung up the phone, I realized this was just the beginning. Mark and his mother had underestimated me for years. It was time to show them that I was no longer the woman they thought they could control. My journey of self-discovery and revenge had just begun. In my small apartment, surrounded by the few belongings I had taken with me, I reflected on the past 30 years with Mark. Our marriage, once filled with promise, had slowly disintegrated into a shadow of what it could have been. It all started blissfully. Mark was charming and attentive, and we were young, full of dreams. But as the years passed, the charm faded, revealing a man more interested in his own needs than those of his family. When Alex was born, I thought it would bring us closer, but it only highlighted our differences. Mark's idea of parenting was providing financially, leaving the emotional nurturing to me. His mother, Eleanor, always hovered in the background, her criticism of my parenting a constant drone. "Anna, you're coddling the boy too much," Eleanor would say. "Mark never needed all this fuss." I endured her jibes, focusing on Alex, who grew up to be a thoughtful and independent young man, despite the tension at home. The turning point came when Eleanor moved in with us. Mark didn't even discuss it with me. I just came home one day to find her bags in the hallway. "My house is too lonely," she had said, a manipulative glint in her eye. Living with Eleanor was suffocating. She criticized everything from my cooking to the way I dressed. "Mark could have done so much better," she would often say within my earshot. But what truly broke me was discovering Mark's betrayal. I stumbled upon bank statements one day, revealing large withdrawals from our joint account. money used to fund Eleanor's gambling habit and Mark's secret indulgences. Confronting them led to heated arguments, with Mark always siding with his mother. "She's my mother, Anna. She needs this to cope with her loneliness," he would argue, dismissive of my concerns. The final straw came when I overheard a conversation between them, plotting to take control of the finances completely, reducing me to nothing but an occupant in their house. I knew then that I couldn't live in that shadow any longer. The day I left, I promised myself that they would one day understand the pain they had caused. My plan was simple yet effective. I would hit them where it hurt the most: their pride and their finances. I started by legally separating our finances, a move that shocked Mark. "What do you think you're doing?" he had yelled over the phone. "Protecting myself, something I should have done years ago," I replied, my voice calm but firm. Eleanor's reaction was even more dramatic. "You ungrateful wretch! After everything we've done for you," she screeched when she found out. But I was unmoved. The years of submission were over. I was playing by my own rules now, and this was just the beginning of their karma. The weeks following my financial independence were tumultuous. Mark and Eleanor were furious, their true natures fully exposed in their anger. I received countless calls, each more venomous than the last. "You think you're clever, Anna?" Mark hissed during one call. "You're nothing without me. You'll come crawling back." "I won't, Mark. I'm done being your puppet," I replied, my newfound strength bolstering my words. Eleanor was even more vitriolic. "You'll regret this, Anna. You've ruined our family." "There was no family to ruin, Eleanor. It was an illusion," I shot back. Despite their threats, I felt liberated. The fear that once controlled me had evaporated, replaced by a resolute desire for justice. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. I started by reaching out to old friends and acquaintances, sharing my story. The truth about Mark and Eleanor's manipulations and financial deceit quickly spread, tarnishing their reputations. Mark, who prided himself on his social standing, was appalled. "How could you do this to me?" he demanded during a rare face-to-face encounter. "You did this to yourself," I replied calmly. "I'm just shedding light on it." Eleanor, faced with the community's judgment, was equally distraught. "You've turned everyone against us. This is war, Anna." But I was no longer intimidated by her. "No, Eleanor, this is justice." I watched as their world crumbled. Mark's friends began to distance themselves, wary of his tarnished image. Eleanor's social circle, once a source of her pride, dwindled as the truth about her gambling and manipulation spread. But I didn't stop there. I knew their financial instability was their weakest point. With the help of a lawyer, I began the process of claiming my share of our joint assets, ensuring that Eleanor's gambling debts were exposed and Mark's mismanagement of our finances was brought to light. The court proceedings were grueling, but I stood my ground. Mark and Eleanor's attempts to discredit me fell flat, their lies and deceit no match for the truth. As the judge ruled in my favor, granting me a significant portion of our assets, I saw the defeat in Mark and Eleanor's eyes. It was more than just a legal victory. It was a moral one. "You've destroyed us, Anna," Mark said, a shadow of his former arrogant self. "No, Mark. You destroyed us long ago. I'm just picking up the pieces," I replied. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I looked forward to the future, free from the chains of my past. Mark and Eleanor's downfall was the first step in my journey of reclaiming my life, and I was ready for whatever came next. The aftermath of the court ruling was a whirlwind. With my rightful share of the assets, I began building a life free from Mark and Eleanor's shadow. Their reactions, however, were a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You can't do this to us, Anna," Mark exclaimed over the phone one evening, his voice laced with desperation. "I've done nothing but take back what's mine," I replied firmly. "You should have thought about the consequences before you betrayed me." Eleanor's response was more underhanded. She tried to rally family members against me, painting herself as a victim. But her attempts were futile. The truth about her had spread too far. "Anna, you're tearing this family apart," she accused during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "This family was broken long before I left," I countered, not giving her the satisfaction of seeing me upset. I relished the freedom of living on my own terms. I changed my phone number, cutting off their direct line of harassment. I also started volunteering at a local shelter, finding solace in helping others who had faced similar struggles. But my quest for justice wasn't over. I learned that Eleanor was planning to contest the court's decision, still clinging to the hope of reclaiming the money for her gambling habits. "You won't get away with this, Anna. I'll make sure of it," she threatened in a message relayed through a relative. In response, I fortified my legal defenses, prepared to counter any move she made. I was no longer the woman who shied away from confrontation. I was a fighter, standing up for what was rightfully mine. Mark, meanwhile, was crumbling under the pressure. His once pristine image was now tarnished, and his career suffered as a result. The friends and connections he valued so much were now distancing themselves, unwilling to associate with a man caught in scandal. "You've ruined me, Anna," he lamented during a rare moment of reflection. "You ruined yourself, Mark. I just exposed the truth," I replied. As the weeks turned into months, I watched as their once secure world disintegrated. Eleanor's attempt to contest the court's decision failed miserably, leaving her financially and socially bankrupt. Mark's career continued its downward spiral, his reputation irreparably damaged. But despite their downfall, I felt no joy in their suffering. It was a necessary step in my journey, but it was not the end. I had reclaimed my independence and my dignity, but I was still healing from years of neglect and emotional abuse. As I continued to rebuild my life, I focused on finding peace and happiness within myself. I had emerged from the shadows of my past, stronger and more resilient. My story was not one of revenge, but of emancipation, a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Several months had passed since the court's decision, and the ripples of my actions were still felt. Mark and Eleanor, now estranged from most of their acquaintances, were living a shadow of their former lives. One day, I received an unexpected visit from Alex. He looked troubled, his usually bright eyes clouded with concern. "Mom, I just came from seeing Dad and Grandma," he began, his voice heavy. They're not doing well." I offered him a seat and a warm cup of tea. "Tell me what happened, Alex." He sighed deeply before continuing. "Dad's been let go from his job, his drinking, it's gotten worse. And Grandma, she's lost everything to gambling. They're selling the house." I listened, my heart aching for Alex. Despite everything, they were still his family. "Mom, did we go too far?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Alex, we stood up for what's right. They made their choices," I replied, my voice tinged with sadness. The news of their misfortune didn't bring me joy. Instead, it was a somber reminder of the consequences of a life lived without integrity and respect for others. The following weeks were filled with whispers and rumors. Mark and Eleanor's house, once a symbol of their success, was now on the market. Their fall from grace was complete. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Mark had tried to find work, but his reputation preceded him. Eleanor, meanwhile, had become a pariah in her social circles, her gambling addiction now public knowledge. One evening, while I was out for a walk, I saw Mark. He was a shadow of the man he once was, his posture slumped, his eyes hollow. Our paths crossed, and for a moment we stood there in silence. "Anna, he began, his voice cracking. "There's nothing to say, Mark," I interrupted. "You chose your path." He nodded slowly, a resigned look in his eyes. "I never thought it would come to this," he murmured. As I walked away, leaving Mark behind, I felt a sense of closure. The man who had once held so much power over me was now just a stranger with a broken past. Eleanor, too, faded into obscurity. Her once lively demeanor was now subdued, the realities of her actions finally catching up to her. As the chapter of Mark and Eleanor closed, I realized that my journey was about more than revenge. It was about reclaiming my life and finding peace. I had stood up to my oppressors, not for vengeance, but for justice and self-respect. The experience had taught me the power of resilience and the importance of standing up for oneself. As I continued to build my new life, I did so with a newfound strength and a heart ready to embrace the future. Months turned into a year since the upheaval of my life began. In this time, my journey of self-reinvention continued, with each day bringing new strengths and realizations. The downfall of Mark and Eleanor was not my endgame. It was merely a byproduct of my pursuit for justice and respect. One crisp autumn afternoon, I sat in my cozy living room, the warm sunlight streaming through the window, reflecting on the changes. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Alex. "Mom, I wanted to tell you something," Alex said, his voice brimming with excitement. "Sarah and I are getting married, and we'd love for you to help us with the planning." Joy surged through me. "That's wonderful news, Alex. Of course I'd love to help." Our conversation was filled with laughter and plans for the future, a stark contrast to the calls filled with distress and despair from the past. A few days later, while out for my regular walk, I encountered Eleanor. She seemed smaller, diminished somehow. Our eyes met, and there was a brief flicker of something, regret perhaps, or realization in hers. "Anna," she began, her voice quivering, I'm sorry." The apology, unexpected and late, caught me off guard. "Eleanor, your actions brought you here. I hope you find some peace." As I walked away, leaving Eleanor standing alone, I realized the full extent of my transformation. I no longer harbored anger or resentment. I had moved beyond the need for revenge. The wedding planning with Alex and Sarah was a joyful affair. It was during these moments, surrounded by love and hope, that I truly appreciated the beauty of moving forward. The day of the wedding arrived, a beautiful ceremony filled with laughter and tears of joy. Watching Alex and Sarah, so full of love and promise, I felt a sense of accomplishment. Despite the challenges, we had emerged stronger. In my toast, I said, "Life brings many challenges, but it's how we face them that defines us." Today, we celebrate love, resilience, and new beginnings. As the evening drew to a close, I looked around at the happy faces, feeling content. I had not only survived, I had thrived. In the years that followed, Mark and Eleanor remained distant memories. I heard through the grapevine that they had moved away, each carrying their own burdens. My life, once overshadowed by their presence, was now my own. I found fulfillment in my work, joy in my role as a mother and friend, and peace in my solitary moments. As I sat in my garden one sunny afternoon watching the flowers bloom, I realized this was what true freedom felt like. My journey had been long and fraught with obstacles, but it led me to a place of contentment and strength. The end of my marriage was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was the author of my own life, and in this new chapter I found happiness, peace, and a sense of self that no one could ever take away. I stood there, drenched from head to toe, staring at the locked door of what used to be a symbol of our shared dreams. The storm outside mirrored the tempest in my heart, but it was nothing compared to the hurricane about to be unleashed. Gripping the doorknob, I inhaled deeply, bracing myself for the confrontation that had been brewing for far too long. "Ethan," my voice, sharper than I intended, cut through the pitter-patter of the rain as the door swung open, revealing my husband Ethan, looking as if he'd just seen a ghost. "We need to talk. Now." His gaze, once filled with warmth and love, now held a flicker of annoyance that quickly morphed into concern. "Kira, what's wrong? You're soaked." Ignoring the urge to break down, I steadied my voice, my eyes locked on his. "It's Lily," I said, the name of our daughter weighing heavily on my tongue. She's gone, Ethan." The color drained from his face, his body tensing as if preparing for a physical blow. "Gone? What do you mean, gone? Kira, please." The pain in his eyes was real, but so was the anger and betrayal simmering inside me. "I mean, she's been in a terrible accident because you were too busy to care, because you've been too caught up in your own world to notice she needed you." Ethan staggered back as if I'd struck him, his hand reaching out for support against the doorframe. No, that can't be true. Kira, please, tell me this is a mistake." There was a part of me that wanted to take back the words, to soothe the agony etched across his face. But the larger part, the part fueled by months of frustration, anger, and heartache, needed him to feel the weight of his neglect. "You should have been there, Ethan. For all the times you promised and failed to show, this is on you." His voice broke as he spoke. "I need to see her. Please." The resolve in my heart wavered for a moment, seeing the man I once loved beyond measure crumble before me. But this was necessary, a shock to jolt him back to the reality from which he'd been absent far too long. "She's at the hospital. They're doing everything they can, but you should have been the one doing everything for her long before this." Ethan moved past me, grabbing his keys and wallet in a haste, his actions filled with a panic I hadn't seen in years. "I'll go now. I'll make it right, Kira. I swear." Watching him rush out into the storm, I felt a bitter mix of satisfaction and sorrow. This was the start of a long, arduous journey. A journey to make him understand the depth of his failures, not just as a husband, but as a father. The rain continued to pour, each drop a reminder of the tears shed in the silence of our crumbling home. As the sound of Ethan's car faded into the distance, I closed the door behind me, leaning against it for support. The house felt emptier than ever, a shell of the love and laughter it once held. But this was just the beginning. The beginning of a reckoning for Ethan's negligence and the first step towards reclaiming the life that we, especially Lily, deserved. The deception about Lily's condition was a desperate, calculated move, a lie born out of the necessity to awaken Ethan from his complacency. The real battle, however, lay ahead. It was a fight for justice, for accountability, and above all, for the restoration of a broken family torn apart by indifference and presumed infidelity. Tonight the storm raged on, both outside and within the walls of the Wilsons' home, heralding the tumultuous journey that lay ahead. The hospital's fluorescent lights felt harsh against my eyes as I paced the sterile hallway, waiting for news on Lily. The lie I told Ethan gnawed at me, but desperation had driven me to extremes. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled me from my thoughts, and I turned to see Ethan, his face a mask of worry and fear. "How is she? Can I see her?" he asked, breathless, from what I assumed was a combination of his rush here and the anxiety consuming him. I hesitated, the moment of truth looming large. "She's stable. They're running some tests. Ethan, there's something I need to tell you." His relief at my first words was palpable, but confusion quickly took its place. "What is it? What's wrong?" Taking a deep breath, I faced him squarely. "Lily isn't gone, Ethan. I lied because I didn't know how else to get through to you. You've been so distant, so absent. She needed you, and you weren't there." The transformation in Ethan was immediate. Relief gave way to anger, his eyes narrowing. "You lied about our daughter's life?" "Yes, I lied. Because nothing else seems to matter to you lately. Not me, not Lily, not the life we built together." My voice rose, tinged with anger and pain. Ethan stepped back as if my words were physical blows. "I can't believe you'd do this. How could you play with our emotions like that? How could you not see what's happening right in front of you?" I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "You're never here, Ethan, and even when you are, you're not really present. We might as well be ghosts." Our heated exchange was cut short by the nurse's arrival, her expression one of professional concern. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, Lily is asking for you." We followed her in silence, the tension between us thick. Seeing Lily, so small and vulnerable in her hospital bed, brought home the reality of our fractured family. Ethan's face softened as he approached her, guilt written all over his features. "Lily, I'm so sorry, sweetie. I should have been there for you," he murmured, taking her hand gently. Lily's response was a weak smile, her voice barely a whisper. "It's okay, Daddy. I just want us to be a family again." That night, after Lily fell asleep, Ethan and I sat in a cold, uncomfortable silence in the hospital cafeteria. The distance between us felt insurmountable, a chasm widened by neglect and hurtful truths. "Ethan, we can't go on like this. Something has to change," I said, breaking the silence. He looked away, his jaw clenched. "I don't know if I can forgive you for lying about something so serious. And I don't know if I can keep living with a ghost of a husband. Ethan, you've been avoiding us, staying out late, missing family dinners, forgetting Lily's events. Is there someone else?" Ethan's silence was answer enough, his avoidance a deafening confirmation of my worst fears. "I see," I whispered, feeling a cold resolve settling in my heart. This was more than just neglect. It was betrayal. The ride home was silent, each lost in our own thoughts. As I lay in bed that night, the magnitude of Ethan's betrayal weighed heavily on me. The love that once bound us together had been eroded by lies and indifference. But as I listened to Ethan's shallow breathing, a plan began to form in my mind, a plan to expose the truth and seek justice for the pain he had caused. The road ahead was clear. Ethan's negligence and infidelity would not go unpunished. For Lily's sake, and for my own, I would fight to ensure that he faced the consequences of his actions. This was no longer just about saving our marriage. It was about reclaiming my life and protecting my daughter from further harm. The following weeks were a blur of hospital visits and silent dinners at home. Lily's recovery was the only silver lining in the thick cloud of tension that hung over our household. Ethan's attempts at conversation felt forced, and my responses were cold, our interactions nothing more than necessary exchanges for Lily's sake. One evening, as Ethan sat across from me at the dinner table, his phone buzzed incessantly, a symphony of pings and vibrations that he diligently ignored. Lily, now more perceptive than ever, picked up on the tension. "Daddy, aren't you going to answer that?" she asked, her fork paused midair. Ethan shot me a wary glance before replying, "It's nothing important, Lily, just work." But Lily's curiosity was piqued. "You work a lot, Daddy. You missed my school play and my soccer game last week." Ethan's face tightened, the lines of guilt etching deeper. "I know, sweetheart. I'm really sorry. I promise I'll make it up to you." But promises were cheap, especially those that had been broken too many times before. I watched them, my heart aching for Lily, who still held hope for her father's redemption. Later that night, as Ethan and I lay in bed, miles apart in the same room, I turned to face him. "Ethan, your phone was going off all through dinner. Is it really just work?" He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of his secrets. "Kira, I'm trying to fix things. Can't we just leave it at that?" "No, we can't. Not when fixing things means neglecting your family. Who were you texting, Ethan?" His silence was a chasm, deep and wide, filled with unspoken truths. The next morning, I decided it was time to seek those truths myself. While Ethan was in the shower, his phone lay unattended on the kitchen counter. A quick glance confirmed my suspicions. Messages from a contact saved only as E filled the screen, their tone intimate and their content damning. Armed with this knowledge, I confronted Ethan. "Who is E?" I asked, holding his phone up as he walked into the kitchen. Ethan froze, the color draining from his face. "Kira, it's not what you think." "Isn't it? Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing." "How should I think about that, Ethan?" My voice was steady, but inside, I was crumbling. He reached for the phone, but I pulled it back. "Ethan, you've been lying to me, to us. How long has this been going on?" The confession, when it came, was a mere whisper. "A few months. I'm sorry, Kira, I never wanted to hurt you." "Hurt me?" The realization that Ethan's betrayal wasn't just emotional but physical felt like a physical blow. The foundation of our marriage, our family, had been shattered by his actions. "I want you to leave," I said, the words cold and final. Ethan's protest was weak. "Kira, please, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain. You've made your choice. Now it's time you live with it, away from Lily and me." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Ethan moved out, and I focused on Lily, who was confused and hurt by the sudden change. But amidst the turmoil, a fierce determination grew within me. Ethan's negligence and betrayal had not only damaged our family, but had also ignited a resolve within me to protect Lily and ensure that Ethan faced the consequences of his actions. As I lay in bed each night, the silence of the house, a stark reminder of the gaping hole Ethan's departure had left, my thoughts turned to revenge. Not petty acts of spite, but a calculated plan to expose his deceit and ensure he could no longer harm us. For Lily's sake, and for my own, I was ready to fight. This was more than just a broken marriage. It was a battle for justice and a stand against betrayal. In the weeks that followed Ethan's departure, the void he left behind became a space for Lily and me to heal and bond over our shared pain. Yet, beneath the surface of our newfound routine, a storm was brewing, a storm of my own making, aimed squarely at Ethan. One afternoon, as Lily and I sat at the kitchen table working on her school project, the phone rang. The caller ID flashed Ethan's number, a sight that still made my heart skip, not out of love, but a cocktail of anger and anticipation. "Mom, it's Dad," Lily said, her voice a mix of hope and hesitation. I nodded, gesturing for her to answer. "Go ahead, sweetie. I'll be right here." Lily picked up the phone, her voice brightening as she spoke to Ethan. "Hi, Dad. Yeah, we're working on a project about the solar system. Mom's helping me." I listened, my emotions a whirlwind as Lily chatted animatedly, sharing details of her life from which Ethan had chosen to absent himself. After a few minutes, she handed me the phone, her eyes searching mine for any sign of what to expect. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself. "Ethan?" "Kira, how are you both doing?" His voice was tentative, laced with a guilt that did little to soothe the raw edges of my heart. "We're managing." "What do you want, Ethan?" There was a pause, and then, "I want to see Lily." I miss her, Kira. I miss you both. The words, meant to tug at my heartstrings, only fueled my resolve. Lily is doing fine. As for seeing her, you know the conditions. Your actions have consequences, Ethan. Ethan's frustration was palpable even through the phone. I'm her father, Kira. You can't just cut me out of her life because of a mistake. A mistake? The word tasted bitter in my mouth. No, Ethan, what you did was not a mistake. It was a series of choices that you consciously made, choices that hurt your family. You need to understand the gravity of that. The conversation ended shortly after, with promises from Ethan to do better and pleas for a chance to prove himself. But words were cheap, and his track record spoke volumes. That evening, as I tucked Lily into bed, her question caught me off guard. Mom, is Dad a bad person? I paused, choosing my words carefully. No, sweetie. Your dad made some bad choices, but that doesn't necessarily make him a bad person. It's complicated. Lily nodded, her understanding limited by her tender age. I miss him, she admitted, her voice small. I know, baby, I know. I kissed her forehead, my heart heavy with the burden of our situation. The days turned into weeks, and as the storm outside mirrored the turmoil in our lives, I began to lay the groundwork for my plan. Ethan's negligence and betrayal would not go unchecked. I started documenting everything. His missed visits, the late-night calls, the text messages from E. Everything would serve as ammunition for the battle ahead. One particularly stormy night, as lightning illuminated the sky and thunder shook the windows, I sat at the kitchen table, poring over the evidence I had gathered. The weather outside seemed to echo the chaos Ethan had brought into our lives, a fitting backdrop for my preparations. The sound of the doorbell shattered the silence, pulling me from my thoughts. I checked the clock. Almost midnight. Who could it be at this hour? I approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole before opening it to find Ethan on the other side, soaked from the rain, his eyes desperate. Kira, we need to talk. I can't live like this, he pleaded, his voice breaking. The sight of him, so vulnerable, might have once stirred sympathy in my heart, but those days were long gone. You should have thought about that before, Ethan. You made your choice. Closing the door on his pleading figure, I turned back to the evidence spread out for me. Ethan's time of reckoning was approaching, and I would be the storm that swept him away. The morning after Ethan's late visit, I woke with a resolve stronger than ever. The sight of him, drenched and desperate, had not softened my heart, but had instead solidified my determination to see through the plan I had been meticulously crafting. Ethan needed to face the full consequences of his actions, not just for me, but for Lily, whose innocent questions about her father's love and absence haunted me. I sat Lily down after breakfast, a serious conversation brewing over the remains of our meal. Lily, your dad and I are going through a difficult time, as you know. It's important that you understand, no matter what happens, we both love you very much. Lily nodded, her eyes wide and trusting. I know, Mom, but why doesn't Dad come to see us anymore? The simplicity of her question stung, a reminder of the complexity of adult failures to a child's heart. Daddy made some mistakes, sweetheart. Right now, it's important for us to focus on being strong and happy together. As the day progressed, I took steps to initiate the next phase of my plan. I contacted a lawyer, detailing Ethan's neglect, his affair, and the impact of his actions on Lily and me. The lawyer listened, his voice calm and reassuring, promising to guide me through the process of holding Ethan accountable. That evening, Ethan called again, his voice a mixture of desperation and anger. Kira, you're turning Lily against me. I have rights. The only person turning Lily against you is you, Ethan. Your actions speak louder than any words could, I replied, my voice steady. I want to see my daughter. I'll take this to court if I have to, he threatened, his voice gaining an edge. If that's the route you choose, be prepared to face the consequences. I have documented everything, Ethan. Your neglect, your affair, everything. You think a court will look kindly on that? There was silence on the other end, the weight of reality settling in. Kira, please. There has to be another way. The time for another way has long passed, Ethan. You made your choices. Now you live with them. After hanging up, I felt a surge of empowerment mixed with sorrow. This wasn't the life I had envisioned for us, but I was determined to emerge from this storm stronger, for Lily's sake. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal consultations and preparations. Ethan's sporadic attempts to contact us became more desperate, but I remained firm, bolstered by the support of my lawyer and the unwavering goal of securing a better future for Lily and me. One afternoon, as I collected mail from the mailbox, an envelope caught my eye. It was from Ethan. Hesitating for a moment, I opened it to find a letter and several photographs. Photos of us, happier times that now seemed like a distant memory. His letter spoke of regret, of a desire to turn back time and make different choices. But as I read his words, I couldn't help but feel it was too little, too late. That evening, as Lily and I sat on the couch, her head resting in my lap as we watched her favorite show, I realized the full extent of what I was fighting for. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. Justice for the pain Ethan had caused, for the neglect Lily had suffered, and for the betrayal that had shattered our family. As the days turned into weeks and the legal proceedings began to take shape, my resolve never wavered. Ethan had awakened a strength in me I never knew I had, a strength fueled by love for my daughter and a desire for justice. The storm that had once threatened to break me had instead forged a new path, one where I stood firm against the winds of betrayal and neglect, ready to fight for the future Lily and I deserved. The legal proceedings against Ethan unfolded with a cold, methodical precision that mirrored the detachment I had come to associate with our crumbling marriage. Each document, each piece of evidence, was a brick in the fortress I was building around Lily and me, a defense against the chaos Ethan had brought into our lives. One morning, as I prepared for another meeting with my lawyer, Lily approached me, her expression serious beyond her years. "Mom, will I have to choose between you and Dad?" Her question stopped me in my tracks. Kneeling down, I took her hands in mine. "No, sweetheart. This isn't about choosing sides. It's about making sure we're safe and happy. I'll do everything in my power to make sure you feel loved and protected, no matter what." Lily nodded, a semblance of relief washing over her face. "Okay, Mom, I trust you." The meeting with my lawyer that day was a turning point. Armed with the evidence of Ethan's neglect and infidelity, we outlined our strategy. But it was the private investigator's report that truly shifted the balance in our favor. Photos and detailed accounts of Ethan's affair, his frequent absences, and neglect of Lily painted a damning picture that no courtroom could ignore. "Ethan will have a hard time disputing these," my lawyer remarked, flipping through the report. "This strengthens your case significantly." As the court date approached, Ethan's attempts to reach out became more frantic. Voicemails and letters piled up, each one a desperate plea for reconciliation, for a second chance I knew we couldn't afford to give him. The day of the hearing was a maelstrom of emotions. Standing before the judge, I recounted the events that had led us here, each word a testament to the battle we'd been fighting in silence. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed diminished, his usual confidence replaced by a palpable sense of defeat. "Mrs. Wilson, your testimony and the evidence presented make a compelling case," the judge said, his voice grave. "Mr. Wilson, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Ethan's reply was a mix of apologies and excuses, a last-ditch effort to sway the judge's opinion. But the evidence was irrefutable, the impact of his actions on Lily and me undeniable. In the end, the judge's ruling was a vindication of everything we had endured. Full custody was granted to me, along with a stipulation for supervised visits for Ethan, should he seek them. The court also ordered Ethan to undergo counseling, recognizing the need for him to address the issues that had led to his neglectful behavior. As we left the courtroom, I felt Lily's hand slip into mine, her grip tight. "Is it over, Mom?" she asked, her voice hopeful yet tinged with uncertainty. I squeezed her hand, a promise in my grasp. "It's a new beginning, sweetie. We can start healing now." The victory in court was bittersweet. While it offered a legal resolution to our struggles, the emotional scars remained, a reminder of the cost of Ethan's betrayal. Yet as Lily and I walked out into the sunlight, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The battle was over, but our journey of healing was just beginning. In the weeks that followed, Lily and I focused on rebuilding our lives. Therapy sessions, weekend outings, and quiet evenings at home became our new normal. Slowly, the laughter returned to our house, filling the spaces that grief and betrayal had once occupied. Ethan's attempts to reconnect became less frequent as he started his court-ordered counseling. I hoped, for Lily's sake, that he would find the help he needed to be a better father, even if from a distance. As for me, the fight had revealed a strength I never knew I possessed, a resilience forged in the fires of adversity. For Lily, for myself, I had stood up against the storm and emerged stronger. Our future was uncertain, but we faced it together, united by love and a bond that no betrayal could sever. The newfound peace in our home was palpable, a serene contrast to the storm that had raged before. Lily's laughter became the soundtrack of our lives, each day a step further away from the darkness that had once threatened to engulf us. But the final act of this drama was yet to unfold, a confrontation that would close the chapter on Ethan's betrayal once and for all. It was a crisp autumn morning when the call came. A number I didn't recognize flashed on my phone, but intuition urged me to answer. "Hello? Is this Kira Wilson?" The voice was unfamiliar, hesitant. "Yes, speaking. I think you need to know something about your husband, Ethan." The caller paused, as if weighing the impact of her next words. I was involved with him, but there's more you should know." The revelation wasn't a shock, but the call was a catalyst, setting in motion the final confrontation I had both dreaded and anticipated. We agreed to meet, and as I sat across from Ethan's mistress in a quiet corner of a local cafe, her story unfolded, a tale of lies and promises, similar to the one Ethan had woven around us. Armed with this new information, and with evidence that underscored Ethan's inability to change, I knew what had to be done. It wasn't just for me anymore, but for Lily, and for every promise Ethan had broken. Confronting Ethan wasn't a decision I made lightly. As I stood at his doorstep, Lily by my side, a mix of resolve and apprehension coursed through me. When he opened the door, his surprise at seeing us was evident, quickly replaced by a cautious wariness. "Kira, Lily, what are you doing here?" Ethan's voice betrayed a hint of fear, a recognition of the reckoning that stood before him. "We know, Ethan. We know everything." My voice was steady, belying the turmoil inside. "Know what? Kira, I can explain." Ethan's attempt at deflection was cut short by the evidence I presented, the final nails in the coffin of his deceit. The confrontation was intense, a cathartic release of months of pain and betrayal. Ethan's attempts to justify his actions fell on deaf ears, his words empty and devoid of the remorse we needed to hear. "You chose this path, Ethan. You chose to step outside our marriage, to break the trust that held our family together," I said, each word underscored by a conviction forged in the fires of betrayal. Lily's presence was a silent testament to the stakes of this confrontation. Her eyes, wide and watchful, bore witness to the crumbling facade of the father she had idolized. The realization of his loss seemed to finally dawn on Ethan, the understanding that there was no going back from the damage he had caused. "I'm sorry," he whispered, a plea for forgiveness that came too late. "Sorry doesn't undo the hurt, Ethan. It doesn't bring back the time you missed with Lily, the moments you chose to spend elsewhere." My voice broke, the weight of our collective pain bearing down on me. As we turned to leave, Ethan's voice, now laced with desperation, called out, "Kira, please, don't do this. We can still fix this." But it was over. The finality of our departure marked the end of our shared journey, a chapter closed on a marriage undermined by betrayal. In the days that followed, Lily and I leaned on each other, finding strength in our bond. The confrontation with Ethan had been a necessary closure, a way to reclaim our dignity and move forward, unburdened by the shadow of his actions. Our lives, though forever altered, began to find a new rhythm, a new normal. The pain of the past remained, a scar on our hearts, but it no longer defined us. We had faced the storm together, and in its aftermath, we found a resilience and a hope for the future that no betrayal could diminish. The aftermath of our confrontation with Ethan marked the beginning of a new chapter for Lily and me, one filled with hope, but shadowed by the remnants of past betrayals. We found solace in the embrace of my parents, who welcomed us into their home with open arms, their support a beacon of light in the lingering darkness. As we settled into our new life, the reality of our situation began to crystallize. Ethan, faced with the consequences of his actions, spiraled into a solitude of his own making. His career suffered, friendships waned, and his financial stability crumbled under the weight of alimony and child support payments mandated by the court. The social ostracism he experienced served as a stark reminder of the price of betrayal. One day, as Lily and I sat in the garden, basking in the tranquility of a life slowly piecing itself back together, she looked up at me with a question that had been lingering in her eyes for weeks. "Mom, do you think Dad will ever be part of our lives again?" I paused, considering the weight of her question. "Lily, your dad made some very big mistakes. It's up to him to make amends, to show that he's changed. But it's also okay for us to move forward, to find happiness without waiting for that to happen." Lily nodded, a maturity beyond her years settling over her features. "I just wish things could have been different," she whispered. "So do I, sweetheart, so do I," I replied, pulling her into a hug. The simplicity of the moment underscored the complexity of our journey, a journey of healing and rediscovery. The weeks turned into months, and as the seasons changed, so too did the narrative of our lives. I returned to work, embracing the challenges and satisfaction that came with my career. Lily thrived in school, her resilience a testament to her strength. Together, we navigated the waters of our new reality, finding joy in the simplicity of our daily routines. It was during this time of quiet reconstruction that I began to reflect on the journey we had undertaken. The pain, the betrayal, the fight for justice had all led us to this moment, a moment of tentative peace and cautious optimism. The struggle had not only been about revenge or holding Ethan accountable. It had been about reclaiming our lives, about ensuring that Lily grew up in a world where she felt loved, valued, and protected. One evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, the beauty of the moment felt like a balm to the scars we bore. "Mom, do you think we'll ever be able to forgive Dad?" Lily's question broke the silence, her voice tinged with curiosity and hope. I took a deep breath, considering her words. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, Lily. It's about letting go of the anger and hurt so it doesn't hold us back. Your dad has a lot of work to do, but maybe one day we'll be able to forgive him. For now, let's focus on us, on building the happiest life we can." Lily smiled, a reflection of the peace we had fought so hard to achieve. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, Lily. More than anything." As the sky turned from pink to deep blue, the stars beginning to twinkle in the twilight, I realized that our story was one of resilience, of the unbreakable bond between a mother and her daughter. Despite the turmoil, the heartache, and the battles we had faced, we emerged stronger, united by our journey from despair to empowerment. Our future was uncertain, filled with challenges and opportunities in equal measure. But one thing was clear. Whatever lay ahead, Lily and I would face it together, our love and strength a testament to the power of starting anew.